Paul Wolfowitz, the former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush, delivered this unusually prophetic and chilling speech on June of 2001, 3 months before 9/11, at the West Point Military Academy.
The attack on Pearl Harbor. Interestingly, that surprise attack was preceded by an astonishing number of unheeded warnings and missed signals. Yet military history is full of surprises, even if few are as dramatic or as memorable as Pearl Harbor. Surprise happens so often that it's surprising that we're still surprised by it. Very few of these surprises are the product of simple blindness or simple stupidity. Almost always there have been warnings and signals that have been missed, sometimes because there were just too many warnings to pick the right one out.
Welcome to Media Roots Radio. This is your host, Robbie Martin.
This is your host, Robbie Martin.
So today we're going to be doing kind of a follow-up to a very extensive 9/11 broadcast. It was actually a two-part. First part, 9/11, an hour-and-a-half broadcast, and the second part was all on the anthrax attacks for about an hour. We'll link to both of those whole episodes in the timeline right here at the beginning of this radio show. The timeline's interactive, which means that you can go and look at any of the links and sources that we're talking about to back up what we're saying. Also check out those other broadcasts. But today we're going to be going over kind of everything that's happened since, and also just new evidence and new kind of realizations that we've had after studying this subject for years and years, and kind of how it all fits together and integrates into what's happening today.
It's almost impossible if you're, like, say, if you're raising children right now who are just becoming old enough to want to learn about American history. How do you explain to them what's changed and why? And how did we get from point A to point B?
Yeah, and this is a point that you brought up to me that I actually had the honor of talking to Chris Hedges about, and some other people who are whistleblowers like Thomas Drake and some other people, is that in every other event in history that's been the preemption for a war fervor, war hysteria mentality, it's always been an event and then some sort of curtailment of civil liberties, and then a restoration of that civil liberties, and then the end of a war. You know, other than the Soviets as our enemy in the Cold War mentality, I can't compare this current war on terror to any other period in American history, certainly. But it's even more insidious and scarier now because you have 10 plus years after 9/11 and we're still seeing things as draconian as the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, you know, erosion of habeas corpus, due process. Surveillance is so rampant it's not even an issue anymore. Privacy's gone. What you said, you know, kids growing up in a post 9/11 world have no concept of what those rights meant, and they never will. And there's no end in sight to this. I mean, the war on terror is just perpetual.
Today, compared to our first 9/11 episode, I was thinking we could take just a slightly different approach than we did on that one. What we did on that first 9/11 episode was we just kind of went through all the different things and anomalies and what we called the coincidence theory of that day. How many different things had to happen that were irregular for the attacks to take place. And then, of course, we suggested that there was probably inside involvement of some kind. I mean, most of the evidence out there points to that. And then there was an obvious cover-up. There's no question about that after the event with the 9/11 Commission and all that stuff. But the different approach that I was thinking we could take is specifically honing in on the things that were presented to us, you know, either by the media or the government, that were designed to emotionally rile us up. And what those attempts to emotionally rile us up led to. So, for instance, the anthrax attacks were riling us up and getting us scared of chemical weapons, and that's how we got into Iraq. Or the underwear bomber is how we now accept naked body scanners at the airport. Basically those kind of things.
Yeah, and in conjunction with what you're saying right now, there's been a group of archivists who have released a bunch of like Newsweek, Time magazines, all these things from the day and days following 9/11, not from the day, but I mean days after 9/11 and even in the next weeks, releasing these publications and scanning them and having this archive online where you can really see the propaganda machine, I mean, in full effect, 150% going full force. It's absurd. I mean, the fact that they had all the information about all the hijackers all ready to print. The fact that they had all this stuff about Bin Laden all ready to print. I mean, we're talking about days, and even all the buildings. I mean, before there was any sort of NIST report or anything at all, there was already a publication ready to go talking in full detail about the buildings, how they fell, and also all these countries that we need to invade. Libya, Syria, Iran. Yeah. I mean, all these things were on the list.
Who are all these dangerous people that might have attacked us? Yep. When you look at clips, you watch 9/11 conspiracy movies or clips from 9/11 out of context on YouTube, it's really hard to remember how vitriolic and intense the media coverage was. Not just on the day, but like for the multiple days and weeks and even months after it happened. And it completely runs counter to the idea that, the government is this bumbling bureaucracy that doesn't, isn't organized and doesn't know how to do stuff. Well, this was the most organized government-fed media campaign since the original Gulf War, where CNN basically turned into a media spectacle with all their live coverage of the first Gulf War. So, if you want to believe that the government was so incompetent that they couldn't see 9/11 coming, well, they were extremely competent in their media campaign. I mean, they had everything just ready to go, laid out, present all these presentations, CGI imagery. I mean, they had people hard at work, like almost like in a movie graphics department, doing stuff for them. More than they've ever had before.
Robbie, they just couldn't put it all together. Don't you realize how dumb Bush is? Bush is so dumb. He saw, the government might be really smart. There might be really smart people seeing all the evidence piling up and up and up, but, Bush was just so stupid.
So yeah, we're sitting here. It's over a decade after 9/11 happened. I think we did our first 9/11 episode in 2010.
If I could say one more thing before you continue, is that this was really the point, and you just kind of said this, but I wanted to repeat something really good that I heard, is that the media became stenographers.
Absolutely. I mean, this is like the most intense in that regard they ever got.
Right.
I mean, things were just all coming straight from the Pentagon. Even media outlets that you might consider more nuanced and intelligent now, if you go back and read, Guardian articles from around the time of 9/11, or you can read articles by companies that you might think are a little bit more skeptical, like MSNBC or whatever, and go back to the day of 9/11, and they're just as crazy as something Fox News
even the
written.
New York Times. Remember Judith Miller? She went to Pulitzer Prize, and she even was repeating all this stuff about amassing, literally, quote, amassing stockpiles of nuclear weapons with Iraq, and this was well after people were already waking up to that. I mean, there was already a mass resistance against the Iraq War before we invaded, and here the New York Times was peddling pure propaganda, and you're right. I mean, the Guardian, Independent, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all of them. Fox isn't surprising, but all these other ones are, and they literally do say Bush aid, da-da-da-da-da. Like, they'll just, print things as the article. I mean, I found hundreds of these. Yeah, I just found hundreds of these, and I did a little report for Breaking the Set. I'll link to it right now, just about the Iraq war buildup. I mean, that's just Iraq.
Yeah.
I mean, but can you imagine right after 9/11 how bad it was? I mean, it's hard to find those online, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, there was absolutely no argument from the press or any counter opinions to the idea of going into Afghanistan. It was just like a given. It was just like, fuck, okay, we got to get revenge on someone. Okay, these guys, let's do this.
Well, it's interesting what Dennis Kucinich said about Afghanistan when I asked him if he regretted his vote for going and invading and occupying a country to find one man, and he was like, that's not what we voted for. He was like, they criminally... I mean, it was like a lie even to all the congressmen and stuff who voted for. Of course, that's no excuse. Of course,
I do think Dennis Kucinich is
backpedaling.
Not even backpedaling. I just think he knows that that's bullshit. I don't I just can't believe that he believes that.
And I know, yeah, right? Would you really trust a government body to be like, we'll just go and strike a few things and then we'll get out of there?
Because, of course, any person who's familiar with American history knows as soon as you unleash the beast, you can't wrap it back up, put it back in its cage. I mean, that shit's going to go out of control.
And interestingly enough, Dennis Kucinich was one of the only people who initiated stuff about 9/11 Truth, like a new investigation type thing when he was a congressman. So I should have asked him about that, but...
Well,
of
Ron
course
Paul
he knows,
did also, but he backpedaled on it later.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I have some interesting... verify that. But continue, because you have a ton of great stuff that you want to go over, and go ahead.
We've been wanting to do a follow-up to 9/11 for a long time, so I basically put together a timeline of what I consider to be the most important transformative events that happened after 9/11. And I guess we could go all the way back to, the day of 9/11. And just basically starting with the very first, like almost from the perspective of a person, like just the average Joe. What were they subjected to? What stuck with them the most, and what changed their ideas the most about why they should accept, stricter security at airport, why it's okay to invade Afghanistan. So kind of like, the first time we were exposed to this was the World Trade Center disaster, as CNN called it.
Number 2.
Yeah. This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed. Obviously,
people woke up to this footage of the World Trade Center on fire, and people just thought a plane had crashed into it. No one knew what the fuck happened. So that happened at 8:43 in the morning. The first tower was hit by a plane. At 9:03, about 20 minutes later, Tower 2 was hit, or the second tower was hit by a plane. That was pretty much when the idea of it being terrorism started to be broadcast on the news. People are all speculating about it. Is this a terrorist attack? And people were already starting to ask who did this. At 9:30 a.m. is when Bush got up from his chair after reading My Pet Goat and went over to a podium to do a speech in Florida at this elementary school about how there's been a terrorist attack on the United States. He was already using that rhetoric.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
He wasn't very specific. It was extremely vague. And this is actually, so if you think about it, 9:03 is when the second tower was hit. Maybe 2 minutes later, Andy Card walked over to Bush and said the nation is under attack. Not only did he sit there for 10 more minutes after he was told that, he stayed in the school and continued to do a speech that was already pre-scheduled for 9:30 in the morning. This was already going to happen. So what a better place to assassinate the President of the United States. I mean, if you were going to coordinate some sort of attack. Yeah. School full of kids where the press was already all there at 9:30 for a press conference that he was going to do. That was already scheduled.
Obviously they knew Bush was safe. Bush probably even knew it was safe, because wouldn't you be like, get me the fuck out of here now?
But if I was the president, I would immediately get up off the chair as soon as someone told me the nation was under attack and say, who's attacking us? Where have they attacked us? What's our response plan? The fundamental questions that's your job. That's like, president for the most part is just a fucking guy in a suit who just like doesn't do anything really of significance. Right. Those are the times when the president's supposed to act. You don't risk the lives of hundreds of children.
Well, that's a great point, is that Andy Card literally could not have said more to him than the country's under attack. I mean, he's talked to him for about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
So, to sit there for 10 minutes just bewildered without saying who's attacking us, what's going on, is absolutely insane. I mean, it's just not logical at all. It's completely illogical. I've never even really thought about that specific aspect of it. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, it's completely logical. So 9:30 a.m. is when Bush is doing this speech, right? So at the same time Bush is doing this speech is when we get that timeline in of Norma Mineta in the room with Dick Cheney and this underling. And Dick Cheney is being told by this underling, the plane is 15 miles out. The plane is 10 miles out.
The young man also said to the vice president, "Do the orders still stand?" And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?" Well, at the time, I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
So that is happening while Bush is doing the speech. 9:37, the Pentagon is hit by a plane.
Okay, these are live pictures now of the Pentagon. You can see this thick black smoke. This is no trash fire, folks. So
no evacuation order issued by anyone in the command structure. This is even after an employee in the Pentagon speculates to himself that one of the targets is probably going to be the Pentagon.
Right.
Besides the White House, they were like taking like an in-office, impromptu poll. Like, what do you guys think the next target's going to be? And people were like, the White House. If they do D.C., what's it going to be? And he was like, I think it's going to be here. No evacuation order issued. Even after Cheney there was an eyewitness to him being in a room when he was being told that the plane is on its way to hit the Pentagon. Call it negligent homicide, criminal negligence, whatever you want to call it. I mean, at the very least, he didn't issue an evacuation order at the Pentagon. Why would he not do that?
Right, at the very least.
Yeah. You think Bush fucked up on the day of 9/11 by waiting in the chair for so long? Well, Cheney fucked up.
But yeah, Cheney was sitting as acting president at that moment.
Yeah. So basically he failed and dropped the ball. If you want to give the absolute best case scenario.
Absolute best case scenario is that he criminally was negligent and let 200 people die under his watch. Yeah. Best case scenario. I'm not joking. That is
it's almost the same.
It's on record.
No, just because he's vice president, people think that's a harsh thing to say. But imagine if you were like a fucking like air traffic controller and you fell asleep. And you let two planes crash into each other. It was your job to not do that.
Right. And just to remind people who probably don't know, this is a pretty well-known fact for people in the independent media community, but that Donald Rumsfeld, the day before 9/11, had actually announced at a press conference at the Pentagon that they were missing $2.3 trillion, and that it was all this error and mismanagement of funds and stuff. And everyone was like, "How do you lose trillions of dollars? That's insane." And then the next day, it was really never talked about again because the next day was 9/11. But anyway, that's just a side note.
And that's a whole nother thread that someone needs to spend their whole career investigating because that's fucking big. That's a huge deal. So, 9:37, the Pentagon was hit.
Oh, and we need to talk about who told Norman Mineta. I mean, if Norman Mineta testified under oath that this is what happened in front of him, who's the aide that told Cheney the plane's 50 miles out? We need to find that out.
Because they would know what order. Norman Mineta has never explained exactly what order it was.
Right.
When he was asked to clarify what he said, all he said in response was, "Everything that I said in that testimony, I meant every word of it. I wouldn't change anything that I said." So he's being tight-lipped about. I mean, because obviously someone want to know what that order was. So, 20 minutes after the Pentagon is hit, the first tower collapses. 5 minutes after that, the crash in Shanksville happens. The crash, in quotes. Because it doesn't look like any other plane crash that I've seen.
Come on. It's obvious, above all else, that was completely shot down.
Yeah, or at least maybe exploded in midair or something. I mean, we don't know what happened to it, but it was in pieces all over the place. There was no discernible plane wreck.
And even people who I've talked to in the military have said that, they all knew immediately that there was a plane that was shot down, and then the story kind of changed later. Everyone acknowledges that was done as a feel-good takeaway from 9/11, that the people took down the plane. That's basic. I mean, if you don't believe that, then definitely look into that alone. If you don't believe anything else about questions about 9/11 or the official story, that in itself is actually completely an impossible story. Everyone knows that was faked.
Yeah, and what's also interesting about the Let's Roll story is that it was first delivered to the public by the CEO of Oracle. The giant computer company that is like a business-to-business company that sells databases to other companies. Really? And then Cheney he claimed he heard it from someone inside the government, and then Cheney immediately started echoing it later in that day. So that was kind of like him and Cheney are like the two people to sort of invent that story. I mean, that's where the narrative comes from. It doesn't even come from the relatives who got the phone calls. It came from them.
Right.
I mean, that's if you trace it back to the source, in the media.
Unbelievable.
So 20 minutes after that, roughly 20 minutes. At 10:28, the other tower collapses. And then immediately after that happens, on the news wire services, they got a statement from the Taliban in Afghanistan saying that bin Laden denies involvement. And this is because
they got a press wire, they got it faxed in
somehow this got this is the
from
timeline
the hills
of
of Tora Bora. They're just like, what up?
This is the timeline of events. If you watch any TV broadcast unedited from that day of 9/11, so this happens, and then the media didn't really take it seriously. They were just like, he denies involvement or whatever. So 10:28, around 10:30, the other tower collapses, and no longer than an hour and a half after that. So this was imagine only an hour and a half has passed over one of the towers after one of the towers collapsed. People are still trapped in the towers. People are stuck in Manhattan. Some people don't even know what's going on. People are wondering if their loved ones are dead or not.
They don't know if more things are going to be hit. They don't know.
More things are going to be hit. So this is a time still when the media,
should be just covering things like raw, not just on
call these numbers,
live,
having these emergency numbers up, having press conferences with officials in New York City trying to explain what's going on. Almost nothing like that was being done at the time. It was almost just immediately to this focus of, well, who did it? Bin Laden denies responsibility. The fact that the Taliban would even convey that message is strange. It's like,
right?
It's bizarre. So at 11:58,
why would wait? What? No, that alone is strange.
It is.
Why
really
would they?
strange.
I guess did every terrorist organization around the world just simultaneously send a press wire and be like, no, we're not responsible for this one?
I mean, effectively, that's almost what happened. I mean, at least Arafat.
Yeah.
Arafat said something after this happened, and what I'm going to go to next is something that I don't think is talked about enough in the 9/11 conspiracy world. At 11:58, an hour and a half after the last tower collapsed, CNN and MSNBC and Fox News all started airing footage that came from a Reuters camera crew of Palestinians dancing and celebrating in the streets.
Videotape, I understand, that we're going to show you from the West Bank. These are Palestinian celebrations in the wake of
jubilant Palestinians that the United States had been subject to this attack. What are we to make of that, Jennifer? Are we to Yasser Arafat may issue this condemnation? Look at this.
While some Palestinians were taking to the streets in apparent celebration, one youth was quoted as saying, as he received a sweets handed around in celebration, "This is a sweet from Osama bin Laden," he said.
And apparently they were celebrating in response to 9/11. And I don't know, I can't verify that. It's not made clear from the video if that's what's going on. But can you imagine an hour and a half after this happened, and you're in New York City and you're watching TV and you're trying to figure out if your wife is alive or not, if she made it to work, how you're going to get out of the city, or my kid's safe, and then all of a sudden they air footage where you're at this heightened emotional state where you're mad as fuck and you want to get revenge on people, and they show you Palestinians dancing in the streets and saying that, and showing this to you on TV and saying that this is in response to 9/11.
It's truly shocking, and I didn't even remember this at all. I remember vaguely there being reports of something like that happening, and I never really followed up on it. But as you just showed me, there's a clip of actually Howard Stern doing a live broadcast when 9/11 was going on, and he's talking about this footage that's airing, and these callers are calling in and they're saying, yeah, I'm watching it right now, all these pigs are dancing, and it was immediately showing this footage, really pulling on the emotional weakness of everyone who's watching this, wanting some sort of revenge and being really angry, and showing Palestinians. Yeah, it's just bizarre.
It is the most bizarre, and even if you think that the media is controlled or whatever, and you think 9/11 was a accidental event, we couldn't stop it, it was like the work of terrorists, why would the media all think that's a responsible thing to do, is to air that footage?
And it wasn't just
everybody
one
is
media
so upset
team.
Yeah, I can understand that it's newsworthy in a sense, but not newsworthy enough to broadcast in the middle of a national emergency.
And also on all channels, broadcast this clip of these people in Palestine. And also, during the national emergency, not after the fact. And also, who was on the ground filming this and feeding the footage to all of these newscasts simultaneously? I mean, it's a little bit strange.
You know, it is. It's beyond strange, because think about the amount of people watching TV that day was probably in the hundreds of millions. I mean, it probably was like half of every American was glued to a television. Or more.
I'm sure half of the people in the world who had TVs were glued to TV.
So, like, I mean, I just want people out there to put it into the context of the national emergency that day was, and that's what it felt like to people watching television.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, to people listening who might say, oh, it's really obvious, we all know that the media lied to us, we all know that they were, like, selling war and all this stuff. We do to an extent, but really, and I think I do too, but really, like, looking at those archives of Newsweeks and Time magazines and watching the Howard Stern broadcast from the day of and seeing newscasts from the day of, you really don't remember. Because the propaganda was so sophisticated and so manipulative that it really entrenched so much of our subconscious in this nation that's still affecting us. It's still there with all of us. And you have to dig at the root of this in order to overcome it. And that's why it's so important.
And this was a particular flavor of propaganda that is the short name for it is agitprop. And it's short for agitation propaganda. That's designed to make you angry. The dancing Palestinian footage is like one of the most extreme examples of agitation propaganda I have ever seen in my entire life.
It's so bizarre.
I mean, I wasn't alive during the civil rights era, so I'm sure there was stuff just as bad, presenting black people in a certain light. But this takes the cake in my lifetime. I've never seen anything like that.
And it's also such a bizarre way to just clump in Palestinians with, like, let's say hypothetically that, Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked us in exactly the same way that the government outlines. Why is that still necessary or even reasonable in any sort of way to show Palestinians a totally different struggle? Someone who we, with our tax dollars, have been paying an occupying state, an occupying force to brutally occupy them for decades. How does that have anything to do with this fight at all? It's almost just to be like, look, and this is why you should support Israel and, like, hate all Arabs. It's like, look, see, this is all the Arabs hate us for no reason. We're not going to give you any context of why. We're just going to throw Arabs up on the TV and be like, look it, they all hate us. It's just, it's so childlike almost.
It is, and that's I mean, and it worked extremely well. And so I forgot to backtrack a little bit. So right before this happened, at 11:28 a.m. on BBC, this is before the footage of the dancing Palestinians was aired on all the major media networks, Ehud Barak, ex-Israeli prime minister, he was basically outlining 11:28. So think about it, 11:28, an hour exactly after the last tower collapsed. He was already outlining that it was a bin Laden type group. He said that this is going to change the American security structure forever. Airline securities will be increased. He also used the phrase a war against terror. America will launch a war against terror. 1 hour after the last tower collapsed.
Joining me now here in the BBC World studio is the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's in London at the moment. Mr. Barak, welcome to BBC World. First, your reaction, having heard what's happened. At least 4 planes have been hijacked, and there may be more.
The world will not be the same from today on. It's an attack against our whole civilization. I don't know who is responsible. I believe we will know in 12 hours. If it is a kind of bin Laden organization.
Is it something that security services, intelligence services could ever have got wind of?
The question is what should be done in regard to it in order to avoid it in the future. It's going to be a tough struggle. There will be many tough and painful moments along the way. any nation that is ready to host terror or support them. But in this area, we will suffer. It will not be so easy to go aboard an airplane in the near future. Isolate from the world every nation that is hosting them and calling every terror thug with the accurate name, and be ready with all the pains that come with it to act upon our observations.
But let me press this point about democracy and the price democracy may have to pay, because you know very well that many passengers in the United States have long expected to be able to walk into an airport, get on a domestic aircraft unhindered within about 10 minutes of the plane taking off. They expect that as a free country.
And it's a part of the problem that we have in a world which is so turbulent that we cannot, it's a time to launch a operational, concrete war against terror, even if it takes certain pains from the routine activities of our normal society.
I'm not saying that the Israeli Mossad was behind 9/11. What I am saying is that this dude knew a lot of shit. Way more than anybody could have possibly known. He's either prophetic and bordering on having psychic powers, or he knew something that a lot of people knew and are keeping silent on.
Well, and as it's been confirmed and over and over again, is that many people knew, even if you do believe in the exact official narrative, what, of course, the warnings aside, if you believe in what happened on the day as it is told, many people profited off it preemptively. Many people knew about it, were told about it, put down barriers in order to ensure things went off in the way that they did. And that's even believing the fact that this is who attacked us and how they did it.
Yeah,
So I mean, this guy is just kind of articulating something that a lot of people knew and were planning for. In fact, Afghanistan war plans were already drafted, Iraq war, all these different nations that we wanted to invade. The PNAC document was already outlined. I mean, these people already knew that they just needed that event. They say it over and over again, and you know, they don't hide it. I mean, people who are just obsessed with saying that the Jews run the world, the Jews run everything. It's like, no, imperialism runs the world. That just Israel's a very strong, staunch ally with the world hegemon. So it's like,
they play they're a useful piece in the chess game.
They're not controlling us. Why? I mean, we're controlling everything, and we have them under our sleeve, and they have us under their sleeves in a sense. But I mean, it's just absurd to say that Jews run everything, Jews are determining everything, and that Jews did 9/11. It's absolutely insane. It's a complete red herring, and it's just ignorant. And it's also, I almost don't even believe like that many people are anti-Semitic, but I do think a lot of people are anti-Semitic, and I think that it just breeds into this whole conspiracy culture. But again, when I'm reading like YouTube comments and stuff, I also think, I don't believe that this many people could really be
anti-Semitic
this way, and I almost feel like I know that there has to be some sort of, I mean, I don't know, this is my conspiracy
and we're going to get
mind.
to that.
Okay.
I have in the timeline that I made, at one point in it is when a different wave of 9/11 conspiracy stuff started flood into the truth movement.
Sorry, keep going with your timeline. You're just talking about agit-prop.
Yeah, I'm almost done with the day of timeline. So agit-prop, agitation propaganda, the dancing Palestinians just set people off. And the Howard Stern broadcast from the day of 9/11 is one of the best examples, because you actually see them reacting during the timeline, like that's, you know, from event to event. You know, they almost cry when the first tower falls, and then when that dancing Palestinian footage airs, they are talking about nuking the Middle East, killing Palestinian children, because they'll just keep making more terrorists, and all, just going off on these crazy.
You know what? Let's play a little bit of this clip for people to listen, because it's very shocking, and you really do have to hear some of this rhetoric.
Yeah, and this is not, and let's just say before we play it that this is not an isolated thing just because Howard Stern is vulgar or like he likes to act outlandish. A lot of people that day had the same reaction. Yeah, you bet that people all over the place were having the same reaction sitting on their couch watching TV.
They're celebrating. Wreck their lives. For once, allow us Whether you need Israel to do it or the United States to do it, I don't care which.
You know, to me, that alone is a reason to bomb them.
Allow us to bomb them.
While they're out in the streets, throw a bomb on them right now.
Bomb them now in the street.
How would they have kids in the street, 5 years old, jumping up and down celebrating?
5-year-olds. Those 5-year-olds will grow up to attack our children.
They're showing it right now.
Kill them.
If you look at NBC,
Kill them
Channel
for
4.
celebrating. Kill them.
In their schools at 5 years old, they're being indoctrinated.
Here they are. They're all celebrating in the streets. The Palestinians are celebrating in the streets, ladies and gentlemen. They're putting up the victory sign. Children are cheering. The parents have taught them well. Let them all live. Go ahead. Go ahead, and more of us will die.
I think you know what Bush needs to do. I mean, he needs to grow a set of you-know-what.
We all know what needs to be done.
If Bush doesn't do it, he's gone. We have to get a new president. You got to get a new president.
He hasn't said much, really, Bush, but waiting for him to come on and say, I mean,
look at them celebrating in the street.
This is why I say you cannot negotiate with these people.
They are so happy. They're so insane.
Unbelievable.
Today, drop the nuclear bomb on them.
There's no reason for those people.
Teach them a lesson.
Give them nuclear warfare. It's the only thing they understand. Like the bastard children they are.
This is terrible.
I can't even believe that.
Name, but on behalf
I think it's great you guys are still on the air, though. You know.
I'm getting too worked up, and I'm starting to say stuff. I
really want to say nasty, awful
things.
I do
too.
I know, Howard. This is getting me worked up. My blood is pumping right now.
I'm so
Somebody said to me earlier, where do you think it's safer? I said, I don't care about safety at this point. They're bombing my country.
Revenge.
That's it.
Revenge is going to be sweet. The thought that these people are celebrating the death of others. Please, please do something.
This is horrible.
I'm sick of seeing it.
And to be Buddhist about it, I guess I would say that it's disgusting that the people, everybody has that inside them somewhere. Because we are, just a more basic sense than a Freudian sense, we are animals, evolved animals. And we all have this desire to, I mean, it's inside all of us, this revenge and retribution and justice against being wrong and all these feelings that root to just survival instinct almost.
Think about how much better propaganda is now. I remember on one of our older shows we were talking about even how much propaganda and advertising and media manipulation has increased exponentially just over the last decade. I mean, I'm sorry, since the 80s we were talking about how old school advertising is, and now it's so much more insidious and preys upon your most secret vulnerabilities and self-conscious things that you have about yourself, and just things that the other and the fear of the other and the dehumanization of other people and what separates us from other people. And they know that so well, and that's why this has worked so well. And the sophistication, we've never seen it, I mean, in more operating form than we did after 9/11, and it still continues to this day.
It meant a huge shift in the way that, I mean, the Gulf War is the only other thing I can really compare it to. The way that the Gulf War was portrayed by CNN. Where it was nonstop. 9/11 was just the perfect event for that format,
Right.
So right after the dancing Palestinians were shown, Reuters, the same source of the video of the dancing Palestinians, reported that an Arab reporter named Abdel Bari Atwan said that he had interviewed bin Laden 3 weeks prior to 9/11, and he said, be prepared for unprecedented attack against America for supporting Israel. So that immediately following the dancing Palestinian footage, it's okay, well, bin Laden's obviously responsible. He was just bullshitting before or something.
Did the guy come notify the news, or did someone just get a hold of his article at that point and they were
good question.
Yeah.
I don't even think the interview was published yet.
Yeah. I was just
which
gonna
is
say,
also
where's the
strange.
interview?
I mean, I don't think it was published at the time of 9/11. I have to find out about that as well. That's a little mysterious. So later in the day, there was candlelight vigils held in Tehran, parts of Egypt, Pakistan, and India with mostly Muslim people.
But Robbie, the Palestinians were dancing.
Yeah.
So that's why we need to nuke the Middle East. Don't you understand?
I don't remember seeing any footage of people in Tehran putting out candles for victims of 9/11.
No.
So that's the day.
I think another point as well about that day that goes along with the criminal negligence aspect of it is that we know that there were hundreds of warnings. I mean, aside from the hundreds of warnings, the PDB memo wasn't even isolated. I mean, it's come out now, even this year. Someone who worked in the government, they were saying that the PDB memo was the tip of the iceberg. I mean, that there were warnings so intricately, so detailed, going back years and years. I mean, the light was literally blinking red, in their words, not mine. But aside from that, taking all of this into account, when the first tower was hit, they knew that it was the attack. So to not evacuate the second tower, let alone the Pentagon, I mean, to not evacuate the second tower immediately, and the White House, and the Pentagon, and everything, is criminally negligent, because they knew then that it was an attack. And so to just act like it was an errant plane is completely ludicrous and insane and criminal.
Yeah, there's a lot of different levels to it. I mean, one could say it was because, well, they were tied up with so many of these, like, disaster scenario game, like even like Rudy Giuliani was doing like Tripod 2 or whatever the fuck it was called, where it's like some bio attack drill on the day of 9/11, and he would have probably been the one responsible for issuing an evacuation of the World Trade Center. So yeah, you're right. I mean, immediately when the first plane hit, okay, it's the Bin Laden attack. Let's evacuate the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol building, everything. Nope, not done at all.
And when Cynthia McKinney confronted Donald Rumsfeld, who had also changed, and I haven't actually confirmed this, I don't know if this is true, that he actually changed the order to make himself be the one to shoot it down. That's questionable. I haven't verified that, but that is like what's speculated. And also she confronts him on the floor of the Senate, and she's like, did all of these war games that were happening on the day of 9/11 inhibit your ability, NORAD's ability to react, to shoot down the planes, to prevent this from happening? And he said it actually helped their ability.
Yeah, and he didn't even answer that. It was like he just like deferred it to his like
the general. It was like General Myers or something. He was just like, oh yeah, it actually helped our ability to like shoot down the planes. You're like, what? How did it help your ability to have all these people spread out all over the country, not in their command posts?
He does this like weird smirk, almost like he has so much hubris and power that he's just like, oh haha. He has this like amused look on his face. Let's see how good of a swing she takes at us.
Oh yeah, I know what the guy said. He's like, it enhanced our ability. Oh really?
Yeah.
Enhanced your ability.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, and I mean maybe we should take a little break here and
okay.
Warm people up
for the next segment. We'll take a little break for the next segment, but that's pretty much... I love how we pretty much just said everything that we already said about 9/11 on the previous broadcast. Not really. But there's just so much more to say.
Yeah, this we're going to go into on the next segment about all the things that happened after 9/11 and what led to all the changes that we've seen today about like airline security and all that stuff. So don't leave.
Talk about now after 9/11, cementing of propaganda and kind of setting the whole tone for what we've been living in the last decade plus.
Yeah, so this timeline is going to be over a much longer span of time than our first segment, which was just all about the day of 9/11. And we're going to make a special focus. We're going to have a special focus on this timeline again at agitation propaganda. The specific key elements of the propaganda that we were fed that led to fundamental changes in our country and things that the American public basically allowed to happen by not protesting against. So on September 14th, 2001, the authorization to use force was passed by Congress to go into Afghanistan. Both Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich voted for it. You asked Dennis Kucinich about that. He had a strange excuse that I don't really know if I believe. Barbara Lee was a congresswoman who voted against it. She was the sole no vote. Nobody in the Senate voted against it, but one person in the Congress voted against it, and it was Barbara Lee.
Think about that for a second. Think about that in itself. Just one person against a country that was really just
3 days after 9/11.
Supposedly harboring bin Laden, which wasn't even true, as we found. So really, and I mean, was it because that they were told that the Al-Qaeda was being like harbored there? Because I didn't even really understand how that was true at all. Because remember when the BBC did that report, Power of Nightmares, and they were just like, there's no Al-Qaeda here. It's just like goat herders. Like, what was the intelligence that provided within 3 days that really convinced everyone that he was there and that Al-Qaeda was being harbored there?
Well, the strange thing that I've tried to follow this back to the roots of this a little bit, and it seems like the Taliban made it publicly known that bin Laden was being taken care of in their country. And one of the weird things, though, about Ron Paul's yes vote on that is that a guy who was 16-year aide to Ron Paul says that he was actually opposed to the war in Afghanistan and to any military reaction to the attacks of 9/11, but ultimately voted yay in the face of a threatened staff rebellion and near certain political suicide.
Whoa.
But then it even gets weirder, which is not surprised at all, because this is how I was introduced to Ron Paul. He questioned 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
He's backpedaled on that since. The guy, his aide says, and I don't know if this aide has any reason to smear Ron Paul, he might, but it's just interesting that this rings true to me, is that the aide also said following September 11th, Paul, quote, engaged in conspiracy theories, including perhaps that the attacks were coordinated with the CIA and that the Bush administration might have known about the attacks ahead of time. He expressed no sympathies whatsoever for those who died on 9/11 and pretty much forbade staffers.
I'm sorry, that's just really ridiculous.
He is trying to smear Ron Paul, but I believe that Ron Paul thought that. I do.
Where are you reading this from?
Forgot where I got this from, but this is like when one of his aides came out and tried to smear him.
Well, I mean, first of all, that's a pretty logical thing to say. Question whether or not the Bush administration knew. That's not a conspiracy theory.
So that was kind of interesting. So on the 14th is when the authorization was voted on. So that basically gave the Bush administration carte blanche to start waging wars, because it was not specific at the time what it was for. Dennis Kucinich claims that the actual authorization used forces for Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan. I don't know that for sure. I'd have to look at the actual text, and we could link to it on the timeline. So on September 14th through the 22nd is when the bin Laden family was flown out of the United States on specially chartered aircrafts arranged by Richard Clark. Now, there's a little bit of disinformation about that. A lot of people claim that it was when the flights were being grounded, which is actually not true. And we forgot to mention this earlier, but also there was something trying to debunk the Palestinians celebrating footage by saying that it was video footage from the 90s that they had aired to like trick the American public, which turns out not to be true. It was video footage filmed on that day. So the only reason I bring that up in relationship to this is that these like disinformation theories, they actually take away the focus and take away the scrutiny that should be there for other reasons, such as if these Palestinians were really celebrating, why is that newsworthy to air an hour after we're still in the midst of one of the biggest national emergencies ever?
Right, exactly. Perfect example of this. Why are we focusing on whether or not bin Laden was an actor in the, quote, fake bin Laden confession tape, when really what we should be focusing on is the fact that it was a sting operation done by the CIA, the confession tape to coerce a false confession, and how did the CIA have access to him, interview him, and then let him go for the next decade?
So you could argue that from the very beginning, there was counter propaganda being thrown into the mix to try to take the focus away from things that should have been more scrutinized at the time. The dancing Palestinian footage, the bin Laden confession tape, which we'll get to in a little bit.
And just as a little precursor for people who don't know this already, Operation Mockingbird was a CIA operation to infiltrate the media in the Cold War, in the early stages of the Cold War, to infiltrate literally every single major news publication, put actual operatives to influence news, make up fake stories entirely at some points. And a lot of those people were never ousted, and a lot of those people continued to go on and influence these publications which could lend, in part at least, a reason why they serve as more parroters. And I mean, you can look at media consolidation, of course, as another way, but really, this goes back decades in terms of government infiltration of these organizations to use them as an apparatus for the state to spread propaganda and misinformation.
Yeah, and you could even see some connection between the idea of Operation Mockingbird and the idea of just a reporter having this conditioned self-censorship. It's not that all these reporters are directly peddling propaganda and they know it's lies. It's that they are trained to have faith in the system, and also they know what not to report on from just what they perceive.
Absolutely.
And what other people do. So, yeah, the bin Laden family was flown out under the protection of the U.S. government from the 14th to the 22nd.
And you know what's funny is that even though that's like common knowledge, it seems like people realize that the bin Laden family was flown out because of Michael Moore's documentary and stuff. Isn't that weird that we never really talk about that still? It's like, why are we friends with the bin Laden family still? I mean, are we still? Like, is the government talking to the bin Laden family?
Well, they claim he was the
connection?
black sheep of the family.
But that they were still really close, like oil tycoons with the rest of the bin Ladens?
More contradictory information. The U.S. government says that he's the black sheep of the family, and so do a lot of U.S. media outlets after 9/11. But then if you go back, there's stories that existed before 9/11 that say that he wasn't, and that people in the family were still giving him money and all this stuff. He attended a wedding in August, of a family member.
And he was also, I mean, for those who also don't know, we've been using bin Laden as a CIA operative to train forces against the Soviets in Afghanistan in the early 80s. I mean, he was an asset, essentially, going back decades as well. So you can argue whether or not he turned against us or whatnot, but you cannot argue the fact that bin Laden was used as an asset. There's even a amazing newspaper article that we'll also link to, a picture of him. It's like 1990 or something, and it says the leader to peace. This anti-Soviet leader brings troops to peace in the Middle East.
Yeah,
and it's a giant.
He was
photo
the face
of
the Mujahideen.
We should have given him the Nobel Peace Prize at the time.
Yeah,
that would have been really funny.
Michael Moore talked about that in Fahrenheit 9/11. That was one of the biggest revelations he dropped in that movie, and in response to that, Richard Clarke came out and revealed that, this isn't questionable because guess what? I was the one who did it. And this happened years later when...
What do you mean I was the one who did it?
I was the one who ordered it. So it's okay, guys. It wasn't the Bush administration who did it. It was me.
What?
Because he was the context of that is he was considered almost like an anti-Bush hero at the time that he came out and said that.
And then he took the fall for the intelligence failures and it was like,
Yeah, and that happened way before he said that.
Well, why did he say he did that? I mean, that's ridiculous. Just to take the heat off
because there was no
Bush?
connection to them. I don't really know if he's explained it very much. We should find that out.
So it's another kind of him taking the fall for bad PR that was coming out. Yeah, that was me too.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Good for him.
So, only 7 days after 9/11, the first string of the anthrax letters were sent. They were postmarked on September 18th.
Think about how little time that was after this horrendous, horrifying, traumatic event. Everyone in the world is watching, and then you start hearing about biological warfare on top of this psyop that we just all experienced. Biological warfare in the form of anthrax potentially being mailed to everyone.
This is a funny quote I found. I forgot what news agency released this, but FBI Director Robert Mueller came out and said that White House officials repeatedly pressured him to prove that the anthrax attacks were a second-wave assault by Al-Qaeda following the September 11th attacks. During the president's morning intelligence briefings, Mueller was, quote, beaten up for not producing proof that the killer spores were the handiwork of terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, how dare he not invent evidence that doesn't exist? How dare he not just put together something that doesn't exist out of thin air and make it up?
Yep.
What an idiot.
So we're going to get back to anthrax in a second, but so September 22nd, 11 days after 9/11, Taliban is interviewed live on television and is asked, will you hand over Osama bin Laden? And they say that without evidence, no, they will not. But with evidence, they will try Osama bin Laden. But what most Americans were conveyed from that press conference, most people didn't actually see that press conference.
position in this regard is that if America have evidence and proofs, they should produce it, and we are ready for the trial of Osama bin Laden in the light of evidence.
Are you willing to hand Osama bin Laden to the United States or no?
No. Without evidence, no.
The interesting thing about that is that wasn't the story that I remember hearing on the media. It was that they refused to hand over Osama bin Laden. The Taliban refuses to hand over Osama bin Laden after we voted on the authorization to use force to get him, basically, right? So, because if the headline was Taliban refuses to hand over Osama bin Laden without evidence, then it might get people thinking, let's give them some evidence. It's obvious, but they should come up with something. Instead, they did not provide any evidence. That was a non-negotiable for the Bush administration, and apparently for the American people and the press, because the press again spread agitation propaganda by saying that the Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden, which is not accurate. So then on October 7th, 2001, the Afghanistan invasion is launched. First stages of it, the first bombings. 8 days later, on October 15th, Tom Daschle, who at the time was the Senate Majority Leader, got an anthrax letter. And this infected over 30 different staffers in the office.
But do you remember this, where he was testifying saying that Bush and Cheney had asked him multiple times, over and over again, to not investigate 9/11? And all these people are like, wait, how many times did he ask you to not investigate? And they're like, what happened? And he was just like, yes, because he said it would obstruct with other intelligence findings because we were already like embroiled in an impending war on terror and stuff. And he was like, so he repeatedly asked me to please not investigate the issue. I mean, it's just an amazing clip. I mean, I can even send you...
Yeah, let's play some of that right now.
Let's play some of it right now.
Yeah.
Senator, you told us earlier this year that Vice President Cheney called you and asked you not to hold wide-ranging hearings and to limit the investigation to the Intelligence Committee. Looking back, why do you think he made that call? Do you think that he knew that the White House did know something and that they were trying to keep the investigation limited because they didn't want to look culpable at all?
Well, I'm not going to come to any conclusions. It is true that the Vice President has requested on several occasions that we not have an investigation into this issue. Were that briefing to be shared, we'd have the complete story and a much better understanding than we have right now of what exactly the briefing entailed and what the President knew.
Do you have a different response now to the Vice President's suggestion that you not proceed with investigations?
Well, as I told him some time ago, we would limit the investigation initially to the intelligence committees, and that's what's going on as we speak.
Senator Dash, do you think the flying public was adequately protected in light of apparent information that there was a potential hijacking?
Well, then I'm concerned about whether or not the public was adequately protected and whether or not there was adequate information provided to the public regarding these circumstances and Congress obtaining it.
How many times did the Vice President ask you not to investigate this, and have others at the White House also asked that there be no investigation?
Oh, I'm not sure. There were numerous times. I can't recall exactly how many.
What were his reasons?
His reasons were that the intelligence community was so involved in the aftermath of 9/11 that they didn't want to take people off of what it was they were doing.
He asked you more than once.
Correct.
And was it more than twice?
Bob, it was 3.5 times. Yeah.
And it was no investigation whatsoever. He wasn't asking for it to keep it closed, to keep it to intelligence. He wanted no investigation.
That's correct.
And didn't the President also, I remember him following up with you at a breakfast and reiterating what the Vice President called you about?
That's correct.
So the President himself asked you.
That's right.
Were you misled or were you lied to?
I'm not going to make any definitive judgment on that. I think it is important for us to get all the information. There may be an explanation. If there is, we need to have it. I'm ready to listen to any plausible explanation as to how we can reconcile what was our understanding with what now is being reported.
So in the public statements, you've just been going over these transcripts, was the White House misleading the public by saying it had no prior information? And I also just want you to clarify Cheney's statement, no investigation whatsoever, not merely a private investigation. I had thought earlier that he wanted to make sure this was kept, a private intelligence community investigation.
Well, the impression that the Vice President left with me is that he would prefer no investigation. And then when we pursued the matter, I told him that we had no choice but to move forward with the
It's pretty weird how much of a role Tom Daschle seems to have played in this. Like, he was sent anthrax, and even if you think Bruce Ivins did it or not, it was very convenient timing, because immediately after he was sent anthrax, they tried to get the USA Patriot Act passed. So the timeline of events after that was he got sent anthrax. I think at the same time the letters came to Feingold and who was the other guy? Leahy, right? So they got letters as well. And eventually Russ Feingold was the only one who voted against it in the Senate. Paul and Kucinich actually voted against it in the House. But that's it. That's literally it.
And I mean, we know so much about the Patriot Act now, the fact that it was actually a different bill than the one that was pushed through. So not only did they get only like 6 hours to read like a 300-page bill full of just completely evisceration of our civil liberties, but on top of that, they switched the bill out at the very last minute, and they all actually voted on something that they didn't even know at all. They all almost unanimously voted for it. Completely insane. I mean, it was actually like overnight too. It was like an overnight session. I mean, everything against, you know, a democratic process that you can possibly imagine.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So on the 17th, 2 days after the letters come, they actually quarantined parts of the building, the House building, and shut it down for almost an entire week until the next Tuesday. And on the 18th of October is when John McCain went on the David Letterman show and suggested that the anthrax attacks came from Saddam Hussein.
How are things going in Afghanistan now?
I think we're doing fine. I think we'll do fine. The second phase, if I could just make it very quickly, the second phase is Iraq. There is some indication, and I don't have the conclusions, but some of this anthrax may, and I emphasize may, have come from Iraq.
Oh, is that right?
If that may be the case, then that's when some tough decisions are going to have to be made.
This is October 18th, like a month after 9/11, a little more after.
Oh, so this was really, really close to 9/11. The discussion about Saddam.
And at the same time, The Guardian in the UK, ABC News were reporting the same thing, more or less, and it all came from anonymous government officials who will never be named, at all. So then, when the Senate gets back into session, I believe that it's on October 24th. So almost exactly a whole week passed since they shut it down. The USA Patriot Act passes in the House. Paul and Kucinich vote no. Next day, it passes in the Senate. Russ Feingold votes no. And when we say they vote no, those are literally the only people that voted no. And then on the 26th is when it was signed into law by Bush. One thing leads to another. 9/11 led to the war in Afghanistan. That's the direct connection there. Anthrax leads to the Patriot Act. But it leads to even more things as well.
And I just wanted to say, for people, you really should use the timeline here, because we've done reports on the anthrax investigation very thoroughly. Robbie and I both did an hour-long radio show, and we did a follow-up investigation on RT, kind of just breaking down very well what happened and how the official narrative, of course, is absolutely impossible. And also on top of that, I've done a report on the Patriot Act, which I'll link to right now, just kind of explaining what's wrong with it.
Yeah, and I mean, just to quickly, elucidate the point that the Patriot Act is really damaging and caused a major shift in this country, is that it basically stripped us of our right to privacy in a major way. I think it also outlined the idea of an enemy combatant, terrorist. So it greased the skids for Gitmo. It greased the skids for torture. No Geneva Conventions, or no human rights conventions in general being applied to supposed terrorists that were caught. Sneak and peek searches, surveillance without a warrant, if they suspect you of being a terrorist, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean.
Right.
That is a blank check, absolute blank check for them to do whatever they want.
Right.
And use terrorism as a shield for it. While we're doing the war in Afghanistan, after the Patriot Act is passed, a lot of people are outraged by it, but not enough. I mean, it's still passed.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you said it perfectly yourself. You said the surveillance state it's now so closely entwined with our government that of course they're not going to not renew these bills that the surveillance state profits so immensely from. And the military-industrial complex, all these corporations profit immensely from the spying state, the Big Brother surveillance grid. So of course they're not going to scale back these tools that they've authorized for the last decade.
No, because what they've done is they've like thrown out all their old technology and replaced it with new, more sophisticated technology that has this more sophisticated software, more sophisticated digital cameras. I mean, they have all these toys and then they can't play with them. A month after that, this is another, what I believe to be agitation propaganda that started and planted the seeds for anyone could be a terrorist. The idea that your neighbor could be one. Because John Walker Lind was a Californian, like, relatively upper class dude who apparently converted to Wahhabist Muslim beliefs and moved to Afghanistan and trained in an Al-Qaeda training camp or something like that, or like a Taliban training camp, because at this point they were already trying to conflate Al-Qaeda with the Taliban. The American government was saying he was a Taliban soldier, but then they also said that he said he was fighting on behalf of Al-Qaeda.
Right.
They said, and I remember seeing him like on television, like there was news cameras there showing him being like arrested, like where he was all dirty and he was dressed like a Muslim. Do you remember seeing the video of that? Just a small personal story is that I was watching this footage around the same time I was having my own sort of psychotic episode that was completely unrelated to what was going on with 9/11. And like when I was watching the footage, I was like 100% of the belief that it was just like a movie set, like something straight out of
like
Wag the Dog. Yeah, I was like, oh my god, this is just like a guy.
It did seem really weird at the time.
I mean, even if it's not faked, it seems like a very staged news event. Like, okay, whisk him out of the building now. Throw some dirt on him.
And it was just weird that like this one American, like all of a sudden just randomly popped up from an Al-Qaeda training camp. It was very strange.
Well, it was very strange, and where did that lead? It didn't lead there immediately, but it led to the idea that anyone could be a terrorist. Even a white guy who's rich,
Yep, who goes to a middle class, grows up in a middle class family. And you know what, at the time...
Bush called him a Marin County hot tubber.
Excuse me?
That's a literal quote from George W. Bush.
I have no idea what you just said. I'm so confused. What a fucking asshole. Yeah, and then also the Homegrown Terrorism and Radicalization Act didn't pass. But that one was also kind of more of that propaganda of how white people can be terrorists and starting to clump in the animal rights people and like, bloggers and people who are questioning 9/11. And I remember that was actually Jane Harman in the testimony on Congress was saying people who are questioning 9/11 are lumped in with homegrown radical extremists. And you're like, whoa, did you just clump us in with like jihadists and pedophiles and stuff on the internet? It was like really strange. Yep, we did. We did do that.
So only 5... I don't know exactly when the video was discovered or what exact date it was aired on, but sometime in December of 2001, they find that supposed bin Laden confession tape in a shack in Afghanistan. On the tape, no actual confession is made, but it's still a mistranslation. So they're like trying to, like the translation was revealed by Der Spiegel, a German outlet, as being a mistranslation to make it seem like he may have been behind the attacks by making him seem like he was celebrating it and all this stuff. But even with the mistranslation that was shown to us, he doesn't confess to the attacks in it.
Right.
He's just like saying that it was a miracle, and it's like, stuff
a miracle
like that
the buildings exploded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a miracle.
Basically
it's crazy. It is a miracle. It really is.
He's right.
He is.
And then there's another layer to that story, which we got into in a different episode. I think our other 9/11 episode we get into more, but it has been shown by The Guardian, I believe, reported on this, that the CIA actually did an operation where they lured bin Laden into this interview to get him to confess. It was like a setup to get him to confess, and yet he still not confessed, which is hilarious because if they did this and knew where he was going, why didn't they just take him out?
Yeah, why did we occupy Afghanistan for the next 10 years?
Right?
Yep.
So that's hilarious. I mean, even if you're not a 9/11 truther, that in and of itself should make you question the complete bullshit reasons why we went after to Afghanistan.
Right, and just to clarify the Military Commissions Act, I just looked it up. It did get passed. It was in place for 2 years, and then in a Supreme Court case called Boumediene v. Bush, held that the Military Commissions Act was actually unconstitutional because of its restrictions on detainee rights. Determined that detainees had the right to petition federal courts for habeas corpus challenges. So that got thrown out the window, of course, which is interesting, which it makes me really think that the NDA case will be taken to the Supreme Court, and hopefully they can rule on the right side of history on that one, because if they ruled on this for detainees' rights, then it seems absurd that we would have our rights stripped as well on top of that. So anyway, just to clarify that.
Richard Reed tries to set off explosives in his tennis shoes aboard an American Airlines flight from Paris to Miami. But flight attendants and Reed's fellow passengers subdued him.
Right before Christmas, the shoe bomber happened.
Yeah.
Shoe bombing, I should say. When it wasn't really a bombing, it was like dud. The guy trying to light the bomb on his shoe with a match in the plane. Richard Reed, who was a British citizen, who apparently knew Moussaoui, the infamous 20th hijacker.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, Moussaoui.
How do we know that? Through the 187th waterboarding of Moussaoui?
I have no idea. I mean,
that's not
who knows if he was waterboarding? Yeah, he was wearing like a shock belt in court or something. But they claim that Moussaoui has said to authorities that him and Reed were going to be the people that were going to fly the plane into the White House on 9/11.
Excuse me?
Yeah, right? So they're trying to connect this. So now it's not just anthrax and planes being flown into buildings. It's a dude on a plane with a bomb in his shoe. 2 months, 3 months after 9/11, Richard Reed. So this immediately led to increased... the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, I think, was already created at this point. And they were already starting to scrutinize airline passengers more with more security. But then this allowed the idea that, it's okay to take your shoes off now before you get on an airplane.
A very small incremental change,
yeah,
one extra
small.
step,
yeah,
very inconvenient for everyone. Mm-hmm. Before we move on, though, Robbie, I remember something else that's very bizarre that I feel like has to be said.
Yeah,
Nick Berg, the guy who got one of the, at the time that all these beheadings were going on in Iraq, of course, the time of your beheading hoax, Nick Berg was beheaded. I remember hearing at the time that Nick Berg, as he was a contractor in Iraq, while he was in the U.S., before he went to Iraq, he had shared his laptop with none other than Zacarias Moussaoui.
Yeah.
Aside from all the things that happened subsequently because of 9/11, aside from all the things that they fucked up on, these things actually don't make sense. And I'm reading CNN. This is CNN.com, and this is real, Nick Berg's encounter with the terrorists. This was, years before he was beheaded. It's like, I can't explain it, and it doesn't make sense to me.
And I think only a couple weeks after the shoe bomber happened, Gitmo was opened to be used as a special military facility for enemy combatants in the Afghanistan war. Mm-hmm. The most dangerous enemy combatants or whatever. Only a month after that happens, it's already 2002 now, because we're in January, just so people can keep track. And the Gitmo is opened, a gulag that is not a prisoner of war prison that follows the Geneva Conventions, only is able to exist because of the emotional trauma that we experience and the hatred towards Arabs and Muslims.
And how much of a fuck you is it to just have it in Cuba too? Yeah. I always thought that was funny.
Well, that's part of it too, is that they did it there because it's not under U.S. law. Also,
yeah,
it's under a legal. It's almost like international waters. It's like not under any law, really. Right. And that's why weird, shady shit has happened there from before. I mean, the movie A Few Good Men is about the weird, shady shit that went down there. So in February 1st, 2002, Daniel Pearl is beheaded. And the world sees, most people were only able to see it over the internet or just heard about it secondhand. I don't think most of the media showed this video, but you could find it online if you wanted to. The like first jihadi video where it shows his head cut off, and like there's all this like scary like Muslim religious music playing. And this just totally played into like the Jews versus Muslims like paradigm. Another form of agitation propaganda.
Barbaric Muslims.
Yeah. So right now we're having like almost like monthly episodes of look at how evil these people are. Shoe bomber, anthrax, beheadings,
Right.
Just boom, 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 one thing after another. So a while passes before more key propaganda comes through, and on September 8th of 2002, a while after that, after the summer, on September 8th, 2002 is when Condoleezza Rice made the statement that we don't want to wait for the smoking gun to come in the form of a mushroom cloud. And there was already whispers about Iraq, it went all the way back to McCain on the David Letterman show. Wesley Clark has come out later and said that on the day of 9/11, they were told them they were going to invade Iraq. Like that was like one of the 7 countries.
Oh, yeah. We'll put that video in there, too.
And we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism.
Less than a year after 9/11, the administration, the White House, is trying to ramp us up into being afraid of nuclear war. Like, after we've gone through all this trauma, now they're trying to get us afraid of being nuked on top of all this other shit that we've been put through. I can't even remember a time in my lifetime, even when I was a kid during the Cold War, where the nuclear fear was this heightened, where they acted like it was actual possibility. Do you?
No.
So there you go. They're trying to drum up this agitation propaganda again to get you to hate Saddam Hussein because he's going to nuke you. They're not normally connected to it, but the emotions generated by them connect together into this big ball of fucking post-traumatic stress disorder. Right after that shift to Iraq, in October 2002, the DC snipers had killed their 10th
my God, I completely forgot
victim.
about that.
In the autumn of 2002, a ruthless killer stalked the suburbs of Washington, D.C.
He only needed a split second and he could take them out.
People were murdered at random.
White people, black people, young, old, children.
They were finally caught. And the media had reported on at the time that they were doing in the name of Islam. They were Muslims. I don't know what their country of origin was, but it was another attempt by the media to ramp up terrorism fear levels. But this time it was less. It wasn't like this is Al Qaeda or this is the Taliban or anything. It was more just like that homegrown terrorism. Look at what's happening. Like these people live among us. There's D.C. Washington D.C. Yeah.
Again, it was in D.C., huh?
Yep.
Wow.
Sniper.
Wow.
First it's planes being crashed into buildings collapsing, biological weapons, anthrax, shoe bombs, beheadings, and now it's you could be sniped.
Right.
Like some guy could take you out from fucking 500 feet away with a rifle.
Right.
At any time you could be fucking shot in the head for no reason. Like their victims were totally random.
Right.
So not too long after that, this is something that we barely heard about in the United States. About 3 months after the DC snipers were arrested, on January 5th, 2003, the Wood Green Ricin plot happened in the UK.
What does that mean?
That is the equivalent of our anthrax scare. They made this big media circus out of the fact that somebody apparently defected from this terrorist cell in the UK to rat them out, that all these people, up to 20 sleeper agents, like terrorists in the UK, were going to try to kill members of parliament with ricin.
What is ricin?
Ricin is I don't know if it's would be considered a biological weapon, but it's like a really potent poison. It's what Walter uses in Breaking Bad to try to kill Gus.
Right.
And that was like their equivalent of the anthrax scare. So this is like the first time when the UK was exposed to terror, and they wouldn't be exposed to it again until the 2005 7/7 tube bombings.
Which also very interesting how it's just like the same kind of emergency management stuff there.
And what's interesting about the Wood Green Ricin plot is that you tend to think, we're looking at things from in the fishbowl of the United States. We don't see, BBC's how they're portraying this incident over there or anything like that. Colin Powell, right after this, right after, a month after it, he fucking used this to tie together the anthrax attacks with the possibility that Saddam could be behind it all. Not only the anthrax, but also the ricin. So when he went to the UN, he knew very well that the UK was going to be behind them all the way on this.
Right.
So, if you watch his whole speech, he mentions the Wood Green Ricin plot, along with holding up the anthrax. And that happened on February 5th, exactly a month after the Wood Green Ricin plot. And then it was found out later that the man who apparently ratted out this sleeper cell was tortured for his information.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, big surprise there, right? So,
Side note, it is interesting that Michael Moore is not glorifying, but he's defending adamantly Zero Dark 30.
Yeah.
And saying that it doesn't glorify torture, but I don't think he realizes that it's not that it's glorifying torture, but it's showing that torture works. And that's that is glorifying it in a sense, because you're saying that it's good for something, and it really isn't.
Yeah, Michael Moore, I don't know what's up with him. I was going to include some stuff about Fahrenheit 9/11 and him in here, but I didn't even bother because he's just too lightweight. There's some good elements of Fahrenheit 9/11, but he's way less liberal and anti-war than he used to be when he started doing stuff.
Yeah, and
big time.
And just to let people know, really, the extent of the waterboarding, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, which was one of the other big names that has come out saying, intelligence, high-level intelligence, he was waterboarded 183 times in 1 month. Just throwing that out there.
It's interesting because we'll talk about him a little later in the paradigm of the boogeyman, just freak show. First it was Bin Laden, then it was Zarqawi, then it was Mousawi, then it was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and then it was Anwar al-Awlaki.
Yeah.
So they have to cycle through these different figurehead boogeyman every once in a while, because one person is not enough to generate the fear and the emotion that they need.
And how many times have we seen number 2 Al-Qaeda dead?
Yeah,
there's
that's
always
another
a number
thing,
2 Al-Qaeda. It's every.
Yeah, now it's Zawahiri. He's the one still doing speeches and stuff. Bin Laden's right hand man or whatever. Yeah, the anthrax attacks was used to sell the Iraq war to the UN by Colin Powell.
The amount of a teaspoon, less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope, shut down the United States Senate. Iraq declared 8,500 liters. If concentrated into this dry form, this amount would be enough to fill tens upon tens of thousands of teaspoons. And Saddam Hussein...
another form of agitation propaganda to get us to hate Saddam Hussein. And they use this idea of the mobile weapons labs basically to convolute the whole concept of weapon inspections. Where it would be, okay, we'll just go in there, search all his stuff. He's going to let us search it all. But they started it from the get-go of saying, well, look, this is all the ways where he can make it so that even if you do send weapons inspectors in, he shit's mobile, dude. So he's just going to drive away as soon as you
mobile weapons lab. What is he running, meth labs out of fucking trailer homes? What the hell is he doing?
He's that crafty, Abby, that he's prepared for a UN's weapon inspection, so you can never catch him.
In recent weeks, Fox News is still saying Bush was right. They found weapons. They're still saying that WikiLeaks cables reveal that there were weapons of mass destruction, but they're not saying that it's from the Gulf War
ironic.
and that they're
WikiLeaks
from
cables.
I know. So they're saying, WikiLeaks has exposed there were WMDs and all this shit. It's like those are actually weapons that we gave Saddam during the Gulf War, or that Saddam had because
we we had the. What do they say? What's the saying? Well, the reason we knew he had them is because we have the receipts. You know, whatever. I mean, that's another completely irrelevant argument to make about the Iraq War, anyways. Even though that was the reason they sold it to us, that's not a reason to invade a country, anyways. Even
I would hope you're right, Robbie, but look at what's happening with Syria and Iran.
Yeah.
And North Korea.
Right, yeah.
How crazy is this North Korea shit now? I'm sorry to go off on a tangent. We'll talk about that later, but keep going with the timeline.
So, a little over a month after Colin Powell got the UN weapons inspectors to start inspecting Iraq, on March 19, 2003 is the first day of the Iraq War. And think about this. So we're already a little... almost 2 years after 9/11 happened, right? You know, you think of the Columbia shuttle disaster, things like that, and how soon afterwards, you know, even the TWA 800 flight that was mysteriously like blown up or well into pieces into the ocean off the coast. Yeah, they started an investigation right away because the relatives are, you know, demanding answers. But what we're not hearing about this whole time, we weren't really hearing about it at all in the media, barely at all, is that people who were relatives of people who died in 9/11 were demanding an investigation.
Mindy Kleinberg, Patty Casaza, Lori Van Auken, Kristen Breitweiser. These women banded together after their husbands were killed, and now they're leading a campaign to find out exactly how did 9/11 happen.
They wanted an investigation to take place because it was extremely delayed. And like you said, the Bush administration was asking the Senate to delay making a decision on it.
Unheard of amount of time to suppress an investigation after a major event. Unheard of. Absolutely unheard of.
Yeah, completely unheard of. And the 9/11 Commission actually started their hearings, and they were held from March 2003 to April 1st, 2003. And all during the initial stages of the Iraq War, like during this really heightened, intense thing going on in the Middle East that the media was glued to. These 9/11 commissions were happening that barely anyone watched or gave a shit about.
That makes sense now what Tom Daschle was saying at the time when he was saying like they hyped up.
Yeah,
they're they immediately jump into the war.
Yeah, like hey, wait, can you like not do the commission until we launch our next war?
Yeah.
Please?
They're like, hold on, don't investigate anything until we're full-fledged into another fucking ground war and occupation. Hold on, don't investigate.
Yep.
And don't you dare investigate what we're saying about getting us into this war. Why we should even be invading another country. So yeah, no wonder everyone's just like, oh my god. But I remember that at the time, and just to give a point to the people, because really I'm guilty of this too, but when we look back at the last decade and we look critically at the media and we say that they're the arm piece of the government, sold us these wars, they say, a lot of people look at the media and they're like, well, they were duped too. They were in the middle of this hysterical time, and of course that's no excuse, but they say like, well, they were tricked and da-da-da. That's actually not true. They had a very specific agenda to fill, an agenda to sell war specifically. They purposefully ignored millions and millions of people all around the world opposing the Iraq invasion. They ignored the biggest anti-war groundswell in this country since Vietnam. And I mean, tens of thousands of people flooding the National Mall, marching in D.C., completely ignored. Ignored.
Yeah, you're completely ignored. And they're smart, man. I mean, they released a pressure valve even on that specific thing you just mentioned way later. The media unanimously claimed, I think even Fox News went out there on a limb and said that a bunch of retired generals came on to give unbiased opinions, ungovernment opinions about the war, but in fact they were secretly still working for the government to sell the war. Mm-hmm. So, sorry guys, they screwed us, like they lied to us, which is a total pressure valve fake, like taking the fall. Like they were completely complicit, 100%.
No. New York Times comes out later and does a mea culpa about Judith Miller and we were complicit in this and that. No, you're deliberately part of this horrible thing.
Yeah, and Scooter Libby was another pressure valve release. It's like, Well, and that was like the WM.
You know what? Someone used that as an excuse to me. That's so funny you bring that up. Someone used that as a reason why the administration can't keep secrets. Because they even ousted a CIA.
You hold someone up as a sacrificial lamb, and then you pardon them afterwards. Cheney was mad at Bush for not commuting, or no, he didn't pardon him. He commuted his sentence, which is basically freeing him from jail. Right. But he still has a criminal record. Cheney was mad that Bush didn't pardon him completely and erase his record.
But that is true, Robbie. What you just brought up, that's what people. These little things, they're very sophisticated. When you
gotta lay them all out in the order that they happen too, because it all connects together. At least the propaganda does.
And think about this. Also, the propaganda worked so well that even people who are very aware, very critically minded, still hold on to these latchets of information, like the Scooter Libby thing, and they're like, "Well, this, I'm remembering this one reason why it makes me not think that the administration is criminally culpable."
It feels good to when the media seem to jump on the Bush administration and make them pay. It felt really good because we've just been abused.
Right.
We're being abused.
We're battered wives.
Yeah. So it's almost like the battered wife seeing the police slap their husband on the wrist and getting all excited or something. It's this weird psychological catharsis.
And I just wanted to read something that's very poignant, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying in terms of the propaganda mechanisms used by the Bush administration. But Karl Rove, of course, the puppeteer, Bush's brain, quote unquote, told Ron Susskind from the New York Times. I know that we're talking shit about the New York Times, but this is a really good article that he put out. And of course, when we're talking about these media organizations, it's more of a self-censorship. It's more of just the unquestioning instead of the top-down control, although there is that as well. But anyway, so Ron Suskind's writing this article for the New York Times on October 17th, 2004, quoting, obviously, Karl Rove. He's saying the top George W. Bush aide. Clearly, he's talking about Karl Rove. He said, the aide said that guys like me were in, quote, what we call the reality-based community, which he defines as people who believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. That's not the way the world works anymore. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality, and while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities which you can study too, and that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to study what we do. That's Karl Rove telling, blatantly, flamboyantly bragging, boasting to the New York Times top reporter that they totally create reality, that everyone just lackeys to them, that they are totally above everything.
Yeah, the guy's complicit in mass murder. I mean, he's a total psychopath. He's just the way he looks, he's just disgusting.
He is like a living pig.
His Karl Rove rap, his MC Rove thing is just he's like an emperor, just juggling severed heads or something. It's like the modern equivalent of Caligula or something. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. That shit's fucked.
But I mean, this is the way that they think about the world. They look at themselves in this regard. They have
That's
no
a moment
shame.
of truth. That's a rare moment of truth from Karl Rove right there. And I'm sure he's talking himself up a little bit, but at the time it was true. What he's saying is true. They were the masters of reality. They were in control of the narrative.
Right.
And they were creating this emotional storm and feeding into it.
And what other
jabbing us over and over again.
What better example of that than 9/11 itself? And everything that happened after that. I mean, he just described perfectly what happened. But anyways, continue.
I was just thinking how interesting it is that you never seen any pictures of him on 9/11. What was his because he was there with Bush the whole time at the school.
He was probably jerking Bush off under the desk.
So the next thing I wanted to get to, which is the first major pressure valve release, and it was a form of directed, carefully honed agitation propaganda designed to go against the U.S. government. And it was in the form of the now well-known Richard Clarke, the terrorism czar or whatever for the Bush administration, who he says that he is sorry for their failures on 9/11, that he apologizes to the American public for bungling his responsibilities.
Was this after the PDB memo was starting to get some traction, or was this totally randomly? Because I remember this happening after there was some sort of pressure about Iraq.
I think it might have been right after that, because Condoleezza Rice, I think, had already testified to the commission. And she was the one who was grilled about PDB memo.
We didn't really see that. I mean, this is not anything really that the public had seen unless you were watching the testimony.
No, you can watch it now.
Yeah.
You can watch it now, but you can't watch Bush and Cheney because they did it under closed doors and not under oath. But yeah, you can watch the Condoleezza Rice one, and I do think that the Richard Clarke apology happened afterwards.
I also welcome the hearings because it is finally a forum where I can apologize to the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, to them who are here in the room, to those who are watching on television. Your government failed you. Those entrusted with protecting you failed you. And I failed you. We tried hard, but that doesn't matter because we failed. And for that failure, I would ask, once all the facts are out, for your understanding and for your forgiveness. For that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad.
Somewhere along the line, he was designated as the fall guy. Someone wanted to make him the fall guy, and he agreed to do it.
Yeah, and even
that wasn't a natural thing.
Even if he believes it, that was his role to go out and say that they failed. So the second that this is like the first bone that they threw at us, literally.
Absolutely, and the 9/11 commissions, if they were allowed to exist in the way that they were, they should have been designed, then they would have found that wasn't the case.
Well, and
clearly not from all the evidence that you can find now it was not a failure of intelligence. They had heaps. They had too much of it. It's like you cannot say that. They had so much
Robbie,
information.
they had too much information. They didn't know. They didn't know what was happening because they have so much. Because our intelligence is so good.
You're
it's
right.
like coming out of the. But think
they
about
had
this.
They had 19 hijackers' names. They were all going to different flight schools. They all lived with different FBI informants. How do we keep track of all this stuff?
How do we keep track of these people? The Able Dangers is so.
Oh yeah,
extensive.
here's our chart that we had made like 2 months before 9/11 with Mohammed Atta in the fucking center with like a web
destroy
going
it. Quick, destroy it. Burn all the data. Delete the terabyte of information about Able Danger. But wait, Robbie. Here's an idea. How come it took them 2 years to even say it was a failure of intelligence? Do you think that the day of 9/11 they would have said, "We're so sorry, we failed"? Why did it take them 2 years to even throw out a sacrificial lamb and put a petrol? You think that would be
immediately?
That's
a good question. I think in some regard there must have been
hubris so strong. They're like they don't even need. I mean, they didn't need. We didn't need anything.
There must have already been some kind of whisper campaign out there suggesting that already. Right. And I think that there was some stuff because when George Tenet resigned, I think that might have happened before this, where it's like there was like news stories out about how the CIA and FBI and White House were like at odds with each other on like what to do about the threat. So that was already out there, kind of, but nobody had apologized or taken the fall, specifically. It was more just like, well, the CIA knew this, but they didn't tell the FBI this. That was already sort of out there,
right?
Which is all bullshit too. I mean, they just chose not to.
No, you're right.
They specifically wanted to omit things. I mean, Richard Clarke claims that this guy named Richard Blee took out the specific warnings about 9/11 that would have normally got to him. I mean, who knows if we can trust this dude? I mean, he's obviously a player in the whole thing.
But I think an important aspect of what we're talking about, just in case people don't realize what Able Danger is, it was just this giant program, not spearheaded by Anthony Coronel Schaefer, was it? He just kind of
no,
talked
he was
about
just
it.
part of it.
He was just part of it.
Yeah.
Basically, it was a huge program, intelligence gathering program of all these hijackers that supposedly did 9/11, where they lived, the fact that they were living with multiple FBI informants, some of them actually living with them, others living under the roof of like a landlord that was an FBI informant. All trained on U.S. military bases, almost all of them. Just very interesting things that we had known, that we were mapping out, that they were obviously tracking these people. And then after 9/11, these people involved in the program, Able Danger, were ordered to destroy all of the documents, which was equivalent to a quarter of the information in the Library of Congress. I mean, that's an insane amount of information. Yeah. Why would they be ordered to destroy information about the hijackers that they knew about before 9/11? And also Sibel Edmonds.
Go to 911myths.com for some bullshit explanation of why that. I was just reading that website today. It's
God, don't even
ridiculous.
plug it.
Yeah, I mean, I want people to just see it, because it's really weird how many excuses they can make one after the other. It's like when they go through the Bin Laden denials and admissions, they're just like, well, this denial it's probably not from a verifiable source. This denials doesn't seem like it's from a source we can verify. And then, like, when it comes to the admissions, they're like, well, this source is you can find out that it's real.
But I already question people who, like, spend all their time harassing me about 9/11 and trolling.
Oh yeah,
about
it's like
theories.
spending all your time. Well, that
makes even less sense. People who are like debunking it. You know?
Oh no, it is strange, and I think a lot of them are just really emotional about 9/11 and just got really sucked into the war on terror, and then some of them might be agents.
Yeah.
For real. Like, I'm not going to call out any specific people, but I will suggest that certain people polluted the growing anti-official narrative, like, movement, the 9/11, what's also known as the 9/11 truth movement.
Here's the deal. If anyone is a critical thinker, then you have to acknowledge the obvious fact that the FBI, CIA, and the government in general have infiltrated activism groups ever since that they've existed.
Yeah.
They spy, they infiltrate. It just came out that they heavily infiltrated Occupy Wall Street, coordinated these federalized crackdowns. I mean, this is all very out in the open.
Yeah.
Heavily infiltrating, heavily surveilled all of these groups. To think that they haven't infiltrated and haven't spread disinformation and propaganda and tried to take down a movement that we know is rooted in facts. I mean, we're outlining facts. There are plenty of facts that show that the Bush administration at least knew about 9/11. If that's true, that's treasonous. They could all be arrested and tried for treason. And so because of that alone, I mean, it would give them incentive to try to cover up their tracks and spread all this false information and take down any legitimate sort of movement that's questioning their motives, questioning what happened, questioning what they've told us.
It's a given that they've infiltrated every major activist movement that there is.
So the real question is how. The real question is how have they done it, and how can you see through it? And I guess the thing is you can't. I mean, you just have to really...
You got to just stick to the facts.
Filter your information.
The only thing we have are the facts that can be verified from multiple angles.
Yeah, you cannot speculate who did it, why...
The technology that was used.
You just can't.
With some exceptions. I mean, the stuff Stephen Jones has done, there's some validity in that. But to go too far into that and specifically only focus on the buildings, I personally think is the wrong course to really jab a wound into the people who are behind this.
I've realized and I've learned so much since waking up, and I don't blame people for learning about this and just wanting to talk to everyone about it. It is very shocking.
Once you can wrap your head around it and believe it, it's shocking.
It is. But I told these people, I was like, look, I used to say the same things. I was like, I really just think that if we can unify behind a message of exposing the cover-up and exposing, like, the facts that are totally verifiable and that everyone can see, that's a better way to do it. And I've just completely changed my approach.
I was really sucked into the whole building implosion thing, and I still believe that it's very likely and probably happened. I'm just not, like, willing to spend to me it's not worth trying to puncture the 9/11 official narrative by spending too much time on that. I mean, it's worth mentioning, you know.
You have to reach people where it can relate to them, and where it can relate to them is the fact that, like, the Pentagon not being evacuated, the second tower not being evacuated, these very clear things that are very provable and real, and do some, like, reverse psyop shit and just kind of wake them up and be like, look, these are all things that are totally proven and that prove that they fucking were criminal.
Yeah, or just look at the things that didn't happen that day and why.
Yeah.
So we left off at the end of the 9/11 Commission's hearings. They're relatively short, only like a month, less than a month long.
And we'll put in a clip right now on the timeline of Bush and Cheney, Bush explaining why they didn't testify together. He looks like a fucking lying retard.
Well, it's great. And I think in response to that, Howard Dean made a statement to the press where he suggested that Bush knew about 9/11 and didn't do anything.
I know you said there'll be a time for politics, but you've also said you wanted to change the tone of Washington. Howard Dean recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11. Do you agree or disagree with the RNC that this kind of rhetoric borders on political hate speech?
Yeah. Look, there's time for politics. And, it's time for politics. And It's an absurd insinuation.
In that case, sir, can I follow up on something unrelated?
Oh, was that when they destroyed him and said that?
And then that Dean scream happened real fast after that.
Dean scream, bro.
The Dean scream that a bunch of my
the Dean scream.
So manufactured. I mean, that's not what the audience heard. It was like the media feed. Like,
of course.
Like the audience didn't hear. I mean, yeah, it was like a loud like yelp or whatever. I mean, like it sounded like awkward and kind of nerdy or whatever. But like, fucking, that ruined his career. Like,
yeah.
Like people out there think that is legitimate. Like that.
Have you seen House of Cards at all?
No, but I've been meaning to.
Okay, it gets kind of bad, but the beginning couple episodes are good, and like it just shows you how literally, I mean, these things are manipulated so hard, and all these politicians are so bought out, and it's like they know. I mean, if you don't play the game, they'll out you in 1 second, and it shows this really good part in the film where Kevin Spacey kind of feeds this line. Or like, you know, he's fucking this journalist, and she releases like this line about a guy who wrote some article, kind of reminded me of the Ron Paul newsletters from the 80s, and it said something about how he referred to Israel as an occupying force. And so anyway, this interviewer kind of throws it out there and says like, did you write this 20 years ago about Israel, da-da-da, and the guy kind of like, he says one wrong thing and then his career's over. And then of course you can just take that one line and it's like, you're just replaying it over and over again, and your image is ruined. I mean, that's how easy it is. But then, of course, you can be like that asshole who said he wishes Mike came home in a body bag, Todd Concannon. You can be like all these different Republicans and stuff who have horrible scandals, but the media, if it doesn't focus on it, then no one really cares.
No, because they don't. There's not a people working behind the scenes to try to take that person down. That's the.
Yeah.
Ironically, on April 1st, 2003, Jessica Lynch was said to have been, quote, rescued by the U.S. military in Iraq after she was found at an Iraqi hospital after suffering injuries during an attack. This was not an intentional April Fool's joke by the U.S. military, but an attempt to drum up support for the invasion of Iraq. On April 2nd, 2003, the Pentagon released a 5-minute raw video of the rescue and claimed that Lynch had stab and bullet wounds and that she had been slapped about on her hospital bed and interrogated. All of those claims were later found out to be completely fabricated by the Pentagon and whoever was trying to control this PR operation at the time. She didn't incur any stab wounds. She wasn't shot. She was never slapped about or interrogated in her hospital bed. The doctors who treated her actually made a point to disassociate her from the ongoing conflict. The Iraqi military was in charge of the area that the hospital was in, but they never bothered her or harassed her while she was recovering in bed. An authorized biography later came out called I Am a Soldier Too, and it was written by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Rick Bragg. And in the book, he states that Jessica Lynch had been raped in the 3 hours she was unconscious during her captivity. But Jessica Lynch does not recall any rape, any sexual assault, or anything like that. And she claims that she adamantly opposed to including the rape claim in her book, but that Bragg, quote, wore her down and told her that people need to know this is what can happen to women soldiers. Now, since then, it's well known that that was a hoax and that she wasn't rescued in this firefight operation whatsoever. You can easily find out information on the internet about exactly what happened to her and how it was completely different from the scenario that the U.S. military claimed. That form of agitation propaganda, by making American citizens feel like female soldiers were being raped, beaten, shot, stabbed, and basically tortured in the hospital. The damage at that point had already been done. It really didn't matter that later the American public was told it was a lie. The emotion had already been generated, which was the intention behind it. So on May 1st, 2003 is when Bush made the Mission Accomplished speech, which is less than 2 months after the first day of the invasion. that he made
the
speech on the aircraft carrier with him in the flight suit. Holy shit, what a fucking
That was
idiot.
really good. I remember how they kept saying, like, it's going to be 2 weeks, it's going to be 4 weeks, it's going to be 6 weeks, and they're
What
like,
a
mission accomplished, bro.
Motherfucking dumbass. Holy shit, dude. He's retarded. Like, that's... I mean, I like to think that he's not as retarded as people make him out to be, but that is shockingly dumb. Like...
Yeah, I mean,
even if someone put him up to that, like, why the fuck would he
Yeah, they like dress him up in a flight suit and just kick him out there. They're like, all right.
Birdcage liner, get out there in the flight suit. So, Fahrenheit 9/11 never really undermined the fundamental logic for going into Iraq in the first place.
Which is
never brought up anthrax.
why...
Barely brought it up in the movie.
Right.
All Fahrenheit 9/11 really did is uncover the Saudi Arabian Bin Laden family connections to the Bush family.
And if I could just say one thing about that, I have a little article pulled up here about how now 9/11 victims' families, who of course have spent 10 plus years, trying to get a new investigation, none of their questions were answered, and then they have all these people who now, almost the same amount of people who died on 9/11, almost 3,000 people have now died from cancers as a result of being lied to about the air quality, about being inhaling, toxic dust, debris, asbestos, and pulverized buildings. Aside from all that, the victims' families, I don't exactly know what group this is, but they're basically suing, saying that they're asking the Second Circuit Court of Appeals to revive a lawsuit following a ruling where it was determined that basically they're saying that Saudi Arabia, that there's enough evidence behind Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11 for them to reopen a new investigation. They're trying to sue.
There absolutely is, yeah.
Absolutely, and that, so of course this will be ignored. A district judge dismissed the case. This was back in 2005, saying that it wasn't really relevant, and now they're just trying to revive it after another ruling saying. Yeah, basically just saying there is. that there is enough evidence and that they're not going to let this go. So it is just really interesting. It's interesting. And aside from this fact, even if there wasn't any evidence of Saudi Arabia being involved, the fact that one of the guys in charge of, what was it, Keene or Hamilton, who said that it doesn't matter where the funding came from. Because it's of little significance. It's of little practical significance of where the finances of 9/11 came from. Was it Zelikow?
Because it was so small. I don't even know. Some asshole.
It was one of the assholes on the commission who said, in response to someone asking, how come Mohammed Atta, which is I'm sorry, I totally got that wrong. How come General Mahmoud Ahmed, the Pakistani ISI general, how come he was having breakfast with Condoleezza Rice in the morning of 9/11? It's an India Times guy, and he's like, why did this happen? And she says, he wasn't having breakfast with me. But then when someone followed up about how that guy wire transferred $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, some guy in the high-level Pakistani government wire transferred all this money to the lead hijacker, and their response to the question was, that's of little practical significance. How is it of little practical significance where $100,000 was wire transferred to a lead hijacker?
It was of such little practical significance that they omitted it out of the White House transcript of the India Times guy asking Condoleezza Rice.
Unbelievable.
Every single other question is fully transcribed except for when he asks about him, it is omitted from the transcript and it says unintelligible. When it's
really? 'Cause
when
I
you
could
listen
hear it
to
pretty
it
well.
and you could fucking hear it. Just that. It's
yeah,
like,
that alone, out of everything that we've
they're
talked
trying
about,
to.
that alone.
Okay, guys.
They're
That's
erasing
evidence. That's called a direct element of a cover-up.
You're revising transcripts of the historical record. Unbelievable.
So I wanted to backtrack a little bit because I made the mistake of saying that the popularity in the Iraq War plummeted that quickly. It didn't. It took a long time.
Right.
Fahrenheit 9/11 actually didn't come out until
Didn't it happen after
maybe
Fallujah?
a year after. I don't know exactly when Fallujah happened.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to look that up. So after the mission accomplished speech, stuff happens. There's a gap in the timeline until April of 2004. Which is a little under a year later. That's when the Abu Ghraib scandal broke. Mm-hmm. And we'll link to a really in-depth article about that we put together for Media Roots.
Yeah, Robbie did a really good job on that. All the torture shit.
And I think that is what actually started people to rebel against the Iraq War more. I mean, there was already a protest movement, like you said, that was ignored. But the American public, the general populace, started to become against the war.
Right.
because it was undeniable. I mean, there's pictures. Yeah, right wingers and people try to be like, "Oh, what's the big deal? They're just making them walk around
They're
naked.
just a few bad apples, bro.
They do.
Few bad apples, bro.
Yeah, the bad apple excuse, all this bullshit. Rumsfeld took the fall for that one.
Or did he? I mean, he didn't even really take the fall.
Well, he resigned.
Right.
He resigned. Just like when you asked, I love how you asked the guy you interviewed, you're like, why? Why'd you resign? Because it's like almost always code for they were fired.
I know. Well, it was
it's
so
bullshit,
funny. The guy
dude.
wasn't expecting it. It was so funny because he was
Guy's
just
a liar.
like, he was just like, yeah, okay, we're talking about P.J. Crowley. Really quickly, I do want to talk about this really quickly. P.J. Crowley, former Obama administration official who, quote, resigned after saying that Bradley Manning's treatment was stupid, end quote. And he came on the show clearly having no idea what RT was or what the show was at all. And so he was just expecting like a very canned interview. And I was just like, so you left? I was like, so why did the administration pressure you to leave? And he was like, no, I resigned. I was like, but why? Why did you resign if the administration wasn't pressuring you? I was just going to say, I wish that I did better on the PJ Crowley interview. It's just, I just was completely unprepared. I had no idea. Like as they introduced him to me, they were just like, this guy's like very outspoken against the establishment. He like left the Obama administration and
what?
Yeah, and he's like
Totally
speaking
not
out
true.
against drones and speaking out against Bradley Manning. I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. Like, and then he started just repeating. It was like he was like vying for another position in the establishment. I was like, wait, what? Did you really get fired, or are you still on the payroll?
No one. I mean, come on, like
no one really leaves.
Yeah, I mean
unless-
like at least the guys who talk like that. I mean, that's ridiculous.
If you're leaving, then you're gonna be like a John Kiriakou, where you're like going to prison. Like if you're like speaking out.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're not gonna be like a PJ Crowley who's just like, dude.
Don Kiriakou, I mean, he's the real deal. It's just
Right.
like that's it. Like that's a guy who's seen the inside and knows how fucked up it is, and is not afraid to talk about it.
Right.
And in some ways, maybe he's even afraid to talk about some certain things he did see. I mean, who knows? But he's saying a lot.
Right.
So only 1 month after the Abu Ghraib scandal happened, try to guess what happened. I want to see if you could get. Well, you have the outline
Jessica
in front of
Lynch?
you, don't you? No, that happened actually like really early on. I think that was like when the initial, during like the beginnings of the war.
Oh.
So we're like a year out from the war right now.
Oh, the Nick Berg.
Yep.
Yeah.
So a month after, and I mean, it's like it's almost just like they're trying to outdo stuff. It's just like, oh shit, how are we going to deflect this this giant scandal showing our soldiers like molesting Iraqi prisoners?
Right.
Oh, you know, let's do something of the variation of these people cut people's heads off, like more agitation propaganda to dehumanize the enemy.
Right.
If they weren't dehumanized enough already, you know. Like total counter antidote to the
I completely remember also it did work, because I remember at the time people saying, well, they behead people. I remember people saying that all the time, and I was just like, but what is that even relevant at all?
They behead people.
But it's like, and we have giant tanks and LRAD machines and like, so.
It was a total agitation propaganda campaign. Whether Nick Berg was actually killed by Islamic terrorists or soldiers in Iraq or not, that's a whole nother debate.
Right.
And there's a lot of questionable, weird elements about that as well. Whether he was or not, they used it to try to get people sucked into and emotionally riled up again. It was almost like the dancing Palestinian footage.
Yeah,
they fucking showed the video of him getting beheaded on television, all day long.
Yeah. It was very shocking. And I remember his dad was even like, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
His dad was like, I blame Bush, like this is horrible. It was like this really emotional thing where his dad was like totally against how they were
he became pretty anti-war really fast. And I look at that as whether it was actually happened the way the media says it did or not, the way that it was presented to us by the media all day long, it was done to try to as a damage control for the Abu Ghraib scandal, and also just to make us hate Arabs even more, or Muslims even more than we already had. You know?
Yeah.
Just poking that beehive one more time.
Yeah.
So right after the Nick Berg beheading video, about 2 months later, the 9/11 Commission puts its findings in a commercially available book form. which was like a whole PR campaign. I remember there was like news footage of the book being like printed on the press, like little stock B-roll and shit. Oh hell yeah, dude! Like B-roll all over the place. Like we need to get like 10. We need to get like 10 angles of the book on the shelves in Barnes and Noble, and like get fucking more like money shots of the book stacked up. It was hilarious. So it was like, hey guys, we did our investigation, and we're so confident in our investigation that we're going to publish it in book form and sell it to you for money. And people bought it, and it was like the New York Times bestseller for like a couple months. And that was kind of like the pressure valve, really. It's like, look, we investigated it, and now any questions you had will be answered in this giant book. You'll have to read the whole thing to know if we're bullshitting or not. So then in August 2004, a month after the 9/11 Commission report was released in book form, is when when I say I mean me and Ben's and Lori's beheading hoax video hit the media. And we did that right after the Nick Berg beheading video, because we thought, well, this looks fake to us, so we're just going to make one in our garage really quickly and see if people will think it's real. And apparently the media wanted to just create this agitation propaganda so badly, they were so used to it at this point, that they just pumped that shit out like it was real. So I wake up in the morning with a video of my friend being beheaded by me in a garage with fake blood, and they're acting like it's real. And then immediately they go to Ben's house and interview him and find out he's still alive. It was all hoax. But the real propaganda that was spread that day was that the FBI launched a campaign against us to try to smear us in the media. And basically, if you watched any media outlet that day, you would have just assumed we went to jail by the way they were talking about us.
The California prankster who produced an internet video in which he posed as an American hostage who's beheaded in Iraq says that he was making a social statement. It's shocking, to be sure, but could he face criminal charges for it? I think we're all in better shape than this guy is right now. This fake beheading Mercedes, can this guy be prosecuted?
You know, they were just like, the FBI is doing an investigation. Are they going to be prosecuted? What crimes did they commit? Things like that. And we never got a chance to go on and be like, well, no, we didn't commit any crimes. This is a bullshit investigation. They weren't interested in that. They were only interested in showing that anyone who does anything to try to combat this kind of agitation propaganda in a way that's this effective will be fucking intimidated, and you'll get smeared. Like, if we're not going to actually be able to arrest you, we will intimidate you and smear you.
Yeah, and once again, the media acted like you guys purposefully tricked them, and how dare you guys
they
spit on the grave of Nick Berg. But really,
what they failed, Nick Berg dying on TV all day long.
Yeah, and what
you're trying to call us offensive.
What they failed to say is that they just picked it off of a media sharing website, Kazaa, and just played it as if it was real. And Ben says his name. I mean, this is a whole other story that people should check out in our first 9/11 show breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
But
Absolutely.
it is a shocking story, and it really does show the media's complete ineptitude and just
and fervor to just like play into this fear.
Yeah.
Like they were just like, another beheading, play it quick, play it. So that's what they did.
Yeah.
And then pretty much not too long after this happened, they claimed that our video was the reason they kicked Al Jazeera out of Iraq. And they put greater scrutiny on press operating in Iraq.
Yeah, because it was really foreign press's role.
They blamed Al Jazeera for it, which is hilarious.
That is amazing.
Like acting like they spread disinformation. It's like, well, no, actually, that's not what happened at all.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
So then later, there was a lot of other beheading videos that came out that may or may not have been real that the media just was like too afraid to touch. I mean, they touched it a little bit, but they weren't as intense as they were with the Ben or the Nick Berg beheading one, because they were afraid. They didn't want to get like tricked again, you know.
Yeah, you're right. There were very little beheading news in the news after
even though there was a lot. Like there was like over 20 reported by the media beheadings that just weren't used as agitation propaganda.
Right.
And there's a distinct difference between a beheading that was used for agitation propaganda and one that was not. I mean, they just don't. They cover it once and then that's it.
Right.
They don't try to get you to hate another race of people, you know, at the same time. It's very clear when they do that.
Yeah,
and they
of course.
don't. Of course. So then, like, around this time is when 9/11 truth stuff started to become pretty well researched and legitimate, in the sense that there was good books coming out around this time. Mike Rupert released Crossing the Rubicon in September of 2004, which was the first book, to my knowledge, to expose that there were war games going on 9/11 that involved hijackings and all this shit. Simulated hijackings. So this is right before, this is when John Kerry is, he's won the primary, we're gearing up into the election, and I think people were so worried about the election that people were like, what's going to be the October surprise, that term that you hear. And lo and behold, the October surprise was from a dude we hadn't heard from for like 3 years. And it was in the form of a videotape where bin Laden does a taped speech about how America is going to need to choose. Like, the translation made it sound like he's asking you to, like, choose who you're going to vote for in the American elections. And it's also, in the translation, it's also apparently his first actual admission or supposed admission to the attacks. So it's funny the way the media presents it, because it's like, well, he confessed in this video back in December of 2001, but no, actually in 2004 was his first admission. It's like, you can't have it both ways. Like, this was...
Well, people should think about that for 1 second, because that is extremely shocking.
October 29th.
So
what is
even
election day, November 7th?
Even if you believe that bin Laden did that, why would bin Laden be playing into politics? Why would he want Kerry to win? Why would bin Laden take a political stand on our political spectrum,
bizarre,
on our elections? Why would he play into the October surprise thing? I mean, it's almost like we're just pawns in this huge dog and pony show, wag the dog setup, where they're purposefully, they know it. People are even making jokes about it, the October surprise, and then lo and behold, a videotape of bin Laden confessing 9/11 comes out days before the election. Does anyone else think this is just a little bit manufactured?
Yeah, and guess what? There's actual documented evidence to show that Bush was slightly behind in the polls, and then he got like a 6-point surge in some of the polls.
So it works.
Yeah, and then it still didn't stick, because then the exit polls showed that Kerry was going to win, and
well, it still didn't stick because Kerry actually did win, even though he's a total pussy, patsy. Designed to take the fall. He just bounces. He bounces, takes millions of dollars, and we don't hear from him for like 5 years, and now he's back as Secretary of State. Amazing.
And so after Bush wins the election, which is obvious, and John Kerry conceded in 2 hours or something after that.
The exit polls were all
ridiculous.
All flipped. Absolutely zero contesting the outcome whatsoever. Zero. So
after this election, the most important 9/11 event, at least in 2005, and even most of 2006, is that the 9/11 truth movement and the amount of people researching and uncovering new things hit a huge peak. It exploded on the internet. Webster Tarpley wrote Synthetic Terror in 2005. Alex Jones was all over 9/11 truth during this time period. It was almost all he talked about all the time. Tons of people were coming out talking about it. There was all this new information coming out. C-SPAN aired a 9/11 Truth Symposium with Alex Jones, Jim Fetzer, all these people live on television for maybe 7 hours total. That's how popular it became at the time. And then not too long after that, Jim Fetzer and Morgan Reynolds, two people who sort of went to the top of the 9/11 truth movement scene really fast, started talking about space beams and TV fakery.
Well, yeah, Morgan Reynolds was this Star Wars... No, that was Bowman.
No, that's Rob Bowman. I think he was a Treasury Department guy.
He was an ex-administration insider, and that's why everyone was like, oh my god, we have these people who were former administration officials coming out and saying the same thing. And so he gets this primetime TV spot to talk 9/11 truth, and the first thing he says is that the planes were a hologram.
Professor Reynolds says 9/11 was an inside job, and he joins us here from New York.
There's so many things wrong with the 9/11 fiction, the myth, the official government conspiracy.
Well, you say, for example, that there were no planes that hit the World Trade Center. Is that your contention?
And I encourage everybody to do a frame-by-frame penetration of the South Tower, and what you will see is a fake, a cartoon display.
So you're saying,
right through.
You're suggesting that there's some kind of cartoon animation there. You're suggesting that the news media was a part of this. Because
Yes,
those pictures came from the news media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, this is completely insane. Obviously, this guy is a total stooge designed to spread disinformation. There's no other explanation why this guy would say that on national television.
Yeah, and understandably, a lot of the people in the movement are paranoid because of what they believe, that they believe the government killed 3,000 people, of American citizens. So it just kind of, the 9/11 truth movement kind of just imploded at that point and splintered off into all these different factions that were warring with each other and calling out each other as being disinfo agents. I remember Webster Tarpley at some 9/11 Truth Convention called out the guy who hosts Visibility 9/11 and Cosmos as being disinfo agents.
Yeah, remember the Kabuta pork warning or whatever? He falsified a signature.
There was something weird with that just created a big controversy.
He basically presented this petition to all these prominent anti-war activists who weren't joined on with 9/11 Truth and saying that,
they believed there was going to be some false flag.
And they called and they signed it, not knowing. He switched it around at the last minute or lied about what it said, and so then they all were like, "Why did you make me sign this thing when I didn't know what it said?" So that was also really strange. But I mean, Jim Fetzer, Kevin Barrett, Judy Wood, Morgan Reynolds. I'm not saying that they are disinfo agents, but they were the main people, at least as far as I could see, that caused a lot of this ridiculous splintering effect that happened in the movement at the time. And it just kind of imploded. And I remember most of the people fighting against Stephen Jones's information at the time were TV fakery space beam proponents. Most of the people. You know what's interesting, Robbie, and so sad, is that most of the people who try to talk to me about 9/11 now are purely Judy Wood people. Or Mossad did 9/11 people.
Guess what?
Those
Jesse
are the two
Ventura
people.
Does an episode of Conspiracy Theory about space beam weapons, and he interviews fucking Judy Wood.
Are you kidding me?
But someone is leading him down the wrong fucking path. Okay, and we also got one of these dudes, one of Jim Fetzer and Kevin Barrett's minions, tried to come on our show and present an Israeli Jews conspiracy theory about 9/11, and we didn't air the episode because halfway through we realized it was almost like we were being punked by this dude.
Yeah, we were like, so what evidence is there for Mossad doing 9/11 other than just Jewish names and companies being involved?
Yeah, and he kept acting like that was the evidence. That was a question that was offensive to even suggest that that's anti-Semitic. And I was thinking but that's the definition of anti-Semitism.
Right. I mean, there has to be something else other than, yes, Israel profited because of our invasion of Middle Eastern countries and people that are Jewish affiliated in their names. I mean, that there has to be something more than that just to say that a country's foreign intelligence apparatus did 9/11. I mean, that's insane. And it's totally counterintuitive. And yes, you can maybe speculate privately about how things were able to be carried out, but to come out on a public forum and say that is completely it's damaging.
Yeah, and I'd like to call this era of American history as the war on 9/11 truth, because this, I remember for the whole year, it was just the 9/11 truth was reaching this almost too good to be true level of popularity.
Like a critical mass.
It was everyone's gonna see it. A fucking bomb was dropped, with shrapnel everywhere inside the movement, and all these people just started fighting with each other, calling each other disinfo agents. And I think it's very likely that there were some paid disruptors in the movement. I mean, this is even before comments were on websites and stuff. I mean, this is before YouTube comments and shit. It was just in forums and people making websites about TV fakery with all the filled with information, just popping up out of nowhere. And then during the same time, in March 2006 is when the Moussaoui trial happened. So long after 9/11, it's almost like the American government was getting scared about that the 9/11 Commission did not work. People were still very curious and questioning the bullshit Because the 9/11 Commission itself is an obvious cover-up. All you have to do is read
Right,
it.
and these 2 years were very crucial because once the Bush administration's out of office, of course they knew 9/11 was kind of in the bag. They had the next administration totally set up to not investigate, not prosecute, of course, anything. So they just had to survive those last 2 years where there was really this critical mass coming down on them about 9/11.
You're absolutely right. That's a great point.
And they'd kind of exhausted totally ignoring it. I mean, they had to address it, so then you saw a lot of vicious propaganda attacks from the media about anyone who was questioning 9/11. But they had to, like, start putting these people on the air. I mean, even Richard Gage got some airtime, Stephen Jones. Of course, they were all, like, very hammered down very quickly. But people were starting to wake up, and that's when I really started to become very active in the movement, too.
Yeah, and I remember being there with you. Like, I wasn't in San Diego, but it was very much in just that rabbit hole constantly of researching. And I think around a little later, maybe Charlie Sheen came out, and a lot of celebrities started coming out and questioning 9/11. So around this time, March 2006, the trial coincided with the release of the film United 93. And what was so odd in a circus of orchestrated coincidence, pure coincidence, this had nothing to do with the other. United 93 was about Shanksville, right? And about the plane that was heroically crashed by the 4 passengers or whatever. The Moussaoui trial was about him being this 20th hijacker that would have hijacked like an additional plane that wasn't that did not happen, right? But for some reason, at the trial, to drum up all this emotion in the jury, they just used all this stuff from Shanksville. I mean, think about that. While this movie is in theaters and being advertised, the trial is pumping out information to the media about Shanksville, showing pieces that were never shown before from the wreckage and stuff that still seem very odd. Like a red bandana that was found, and the guy in United 93 is wearing a red bandana, like one of the hijackers. It's fucking bizarre. And then they also played the only recording from one of the apparent black boxes that they found, but they only played it to some of the family members. It did not play it to the press, but they did release a transcript of it.
Yeah, and just like the Pentagon releasing just, one angle of a very slow frame plane entering the building, these things are done almost deliberately, it seems, because there's so little transparency and so little facts made available that it forces you to speculate. And then when you speculate to people, then they say, well, you're crazy, you're conspiracy theorist because you're speculating. And you're like, well, I'm actually forced to even explain this to you.
Yeah.
Because they've made so little available that I have to, in part. Otherwise, it's like, but it's like by design that you discredit yourself when you're trying to speculate towards someone who's just like, well, how and why and this.
Well, it's an easy straw man.
It's
an easy straw man to knock down a speculative theory because it's a speculative theory.
And that's why it's so important to just say, we don't know. We're not forensic investigators. We're not criminal investigators. And unfortunately, most of the evidence has been destroyed.
And that's what Mike Rupert, for all his faults about some of his other, I think the guy has done really good research on 9/11, and he kind of jumped ship from the whole movement when the controlled demolition stuff started to take the #1 slot, because he was just like, regardless of if this is good evidence or not, the government will always be able to put up some expert witness who's better paid, has more credentials than we do, to combat this. It's always there's always going to be someone out there to fight this.
My coworker, who, when I tell her about these patsies, like let's say this guy, not Moussaoui, is it Moussaoui that we're talking about? The 19th hijacker, people like him who are literally patsies, or the Christmas or the underwear bomber guy, who we know now, based on Kurt Haskell's report, that this guy was also a patsy. She was just like, well, what are they getting out of it? And I was just like, well, I don't know. All we know is that these people are somehow involved in the CIA or FBI. The fact that this guy was escorted on a plane without a passport in terms of the Christmas. Why do I keep fucking mixing that up? There's so many fake terrorist attacks Like the underwear bomber. You know? I mean, Jesus Christ. I just read again that there was another underwear bomber late last year, and that has been confirmed to be a CIA asset as well. Literally. And it's like exactly the same. I almost thought that I was reading like a verified account of Kurt Haskell's testimony, because I was like, wait, have they just now come out like so long after the effect and admitted that this guy, because it read exactly like it. It was like he was, escorted on the plane without a passport, and I was like, what? They're finally coming out admitting that this guy was a CIA agent, and then I read it was another one last year. I can't keep track, I tell you.
Abby, you're a tinfoil hat wearing truther for thinking that all of these things are not just coincidences of people who wanted to attack us that lead instantly to like draconian civil liberties erosion legislation that was like already set up in advance. Okay, so 2006, the Moussaoui trial is a bizarre circus in and of itself, because it was at the peak of 9/11 truth and happening at the same time as this implosion in the movement.
Right.
It was around the same time, generally speaking. May 9th, 2006 is the earliest iteration of the Screw Loose Change blog that I can find. And I feel idiotic even plugging it here. But I want to mention all these things because they happen around the same time. 911myths.com, 911debunking.com. Very coordinated, and I'm not saying that they're necessarily ran by government agents, but it was almost like if they were just organic, people just wanting to fight against conspiracy theories that they thought were dangerous. It was in response to it was in response to agitation propaganda created by the media, again, based on the Moussaoui trial and based on the rising popularity of 9/11 truth.
Word.
I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and just let's say that they're not on the payroll of the government or like actually working to like try to squelch this legitimate, internet uprising. Or just real life uprising too, and not just on the internet. That they are people who have faith in the state. They're not necessarily right-wingers or Bush supporters, but they're generally people who have faith in the state, and they see the 9/11 truth movement as disrupting that, causing people around them to question that faith.
Yeah.
And they want to feel like there's a reason why, like they have faith in the state. So they don't want other people to lose faith in the state for this reason. Okay, so on August 9th, 2006, the liquid bomb terror plot happened, which didn't actually happen. A bunch of people got arrested, and only, I think 2 out of the 20 people that were arrested actually got tried and put into jail.
Yeah, because what happened is that they didn't have the capacity to even make explosives. It wasn't that they were like deterred and caught and this plot was stifled. It was that actually they couldn't have happened anyway. So that's that. Once again, like a totally
and what did that lead to?
Faked plot. No liquids on a fucking airplane.
No liquids on the plane. A little incremental thing, and alone, but taken with all this other stuff, the shoes, increased security.
The liquid thing is really fucking irritating. Fucking irritating. And I have to put these little tiny things in these bags and they explode.
The biggest terror plot since 9/11.
The United Kingdom was going to be used for a direct attack on the United States.
The plan to destroy 13 passenger jets, told by the people that stopped it.
If this went wrong, the consequences would just be huge.
National Geographic Channel's 11 Days to Remember continues with Liquid Bomb Plot. Next.
August 15th, 2006, 9/11 Debunking, the book released by Popular Mechanics, comes out and has a foreword by none other than John McCain, the man who went on television and said Saddam Hussein was behind the anthrax. Great job, guys, for putting a fucking key propagandist as the person to forward for your supposed debunking book for critical thinkers. So they just immediately out of the gates, they're not even trying to be honest, It's just like, here's our forward. It's by this respected politician, So then on September 15th, September 12th, 2006, 9/11 truth movement's in full swing still. Even though it's imploding as this timeline's going on, it's still imploding. Democracy Now!, normally a very responsible, organization that does great investigative reporting, pitted together the creators of Loose Change, Dylan Avery and Jason Burmis, with the guys who wrote the Popular Mechanics book, to be like the end-all debate on 9/11 on their show.
Right. Yeah, to have like government
Again.
lackeys who are trained with like a bunch of kids who just kind of put together a documentary.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, not
that's a fair
saying that
debate.
Dylan Avery
No.
and Jason Murmas are. I mean, they did some great research, but they're young and
Yeah.
I don't think they're not skilled debaters. You know,
Right. Yeah, the total honeypot to even do that.
Mm-hmm. And I still see a lot of people like when I'll get into 9/11 discussions, you're like, just watch this, dude. If you think like there's anything valid in the 9/11 truth, then watch this like.
And it was a way for
ridiculous
democracy
debate.
now to get off the hook and be like, look, we covered it. That's
Yeah,
it.
and
We're done.
it's funny too because it's like they don't when they do like debates on subjects, you can always usually tell what side they're taking, even
Yeah.
if it's very subtle. This was like Amy Goodman was just like, I'm out, like fuck it, like I'm just gonna sit on the sidelines and I don't give a fuck. Like this
Yep.
is, let's just let this play out the way it's going to. I mean, it's kind of obvious the way it was going to play out. Two
Right.
dudes who've been in the media industry for years, who know PR spin, who know public speaking far better than these two young filmmakers. Just, you know, whatever. I mean, you could watch it for yourself. So
Yeah.
this was so whatever you want to call this happened, you know.
Yeah.
And then the documentaries started coming out. I mean, there was already like plenty of 9/11 conspiracy oriented documentaries coming out. A lot of good ones, which we went over in our previous episode. But this February 18, 2007 is when the BBC documentary came out that debunked 9/11. August 2007 is when 9/11 Conspiracies Fact or Fiction aired on the History Channel. All the while, History Channel is airing shows which talk about aliens and that the Statue of Liberty is a code for Lucifer, like as if it's a fact. But at the same time, on their 9/11 documentary, they just debunk. They just like don't entertain any of these theories. They immediately just try to show you how they're not true.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. July 2008, BBC airs The Third Tower, their WTC7 debunking documentary. A month later,
So
NIST...
someone at BBC is doing something, because it's just odd that the BBC kind of pioneered all these debunking documentaries.
And
like,
listen
really
to the timing,
thorough.
too. They aired The Third Tower
bizarre.
only a month before the report came out for NIST, the one we've been waiting for 7 years.
Right, about the tower.
Thermal
yeah.
expansion.
Right.
Another invented theory. July 29th, 2008, Bruce Ivins dies of an apparent suicide.
Bruce Ivins was the second person who the government claimed was the perpetrator of the anthrax attacks. We already linked to the timeline on a very in-depth investigation on anthrax, so check that out. But that's who that is.
Mm-hmm.
Of an apparent suicide from Tylenol overdose.
And this whole time, the American government made a point to leave us with the thought and the emotion that Arab terrorists sent anthrax
Right.
out to
They
people.
never came out and said, we're
There was
sorry, we lied.
There were some stories and backpage things about Stephen Hatfield being a person of interest, and they made a point to kind of parade him in the media a little bit. But it was never... They never backtracked on that extreme
No.
emotion. I mean, they never tried to correct it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Which is horrid in and of itself to think about that. That this whole time they led us to believe that this was the work of terrorists.
Yeah.
And it's what got us into Iraq.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
The whole time they've let us believe that Al Qaeda was behind the anthrax attacks. The anthrax attacks were letters saying, you know, Allah is great, all this shit. I mean, it's amazing. You can go on for that forever, but so irresponsible.
So 1 month after that, National Geographic airs their debunking documentary. It interviews a bunch of scientists for the pro-official story side, and then when it cuts to like the counter, cuts to people like Alex Jones to like as the science. They're like, well, you didn't get any scientists on the pro side.
Yeah, where are all the
you didn't get any.
physicists?
You didn't get any experts really. You just got people who have opinions. Which Alex Jones has some great, opinions and statements he's made about 9/11, but he's not a scientist or an expert on architecture or fires. And I mean, it was just so blatantly disingenuous what they did. Even in the title, Well, it's called 9/11 Science and Conspiracy.
So there's not going to be any science.
Yeah, so those are like the three. I mean, like if you want to see the debunking shit, go check those out if you really want to see if you can stomach it. It's interesting to see the techniques they use.
Right, but I think that if the end-all be-all should be watching those things, which we did, and then reading Dr. Griffin's book, Debunking 9/11 Debunkers. I mean, I hate that it keeps going, it seems like, circularly, but it is an extremely comprehensive book that just totally destroys the NIST report and the 9/11 Commission report like 100%. I mean, there's no...
And I think Kevin Ryan did a good paper on linking people who worked for NIST to who worked on the NIST report to people who filed patents on nanothermite demolition charges. There's another interesting connection. The people in charge of the investigation of what happened were also involved in some of the technologies behind thermite to detonate structures, which is interesting. Obama is already president at this point. We just want to make that clear. He's the president of the United States.
And he's already made it very clear that there will be no investigation of anyone from the Bush administration.
No investigations. Dennis Kucinich tried to do a last-ditch impeachment effort.
Failed.
The first major supposed or whatever terrorist attack, or let's just say the first major agitation propaganda that happened in the Obama administration in regards to the war on terror was the Nadal Malik Hassan Fort Hood shooting, which happened on November 5th, 2009. And that was sort of ambiguous. It was sort of like the media and the government wasn't saying this is the work of Islamic terrorism, but it didn't really need, it was kind of like the DC sniper. He's a Muslim guy. He was sympathetic to, terrorists or whatever. And he shot, I think, 15 people at the military base. And which
is also just interesting in itself, the whole gun argument that if everyone has a gun, shootings won't happen. Well, everyone had a gun at a military base. How come no one is able to...
It's just none of those stupid talking points that doesn't really make sense. It's like saying, well, why didn't you outlaw knives and forks?
Well, because knives and forks can't kill 15 children within 5 seconds.
Please don't use those stupid talking points with me. And the main thing that I take away from that, which led to the NDAA and basically the continuing escalated drone war, was that they tried to imply that he was being inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki.
Are you joking?
No, I am not joking. This was main...
Wow, so everything literally is connected.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
So look at that. This is when it was already a person of interest.
Investigators connecting the dots now as they delve deeper into possible motives behind the attack on Fort Hood. And a key focus in the investigation is the suspect, Major Nidal Hassan's contacts with a radical Islamic cleric.
That man is Anwar al-Awlaki, an exiled American who has become a powerful online voice. Our Carol Costello was live in Washington with an AM original for us this morning. And Carol, just who is this guy?
This guy Anwar al-Awlaki is like influencing people to commit terrorism. So it's not only, before it was like anybody could be a terrorist, anyone could commit terrorism, but now it's like this man's dangerous because he's inspiring people to commit terrorism. It no longer is bin Laden, someone who is actually supposedly in control of a terrorist organization from the top down. Now it's people who inspire terrorism that are dangerous. Which is taking it a step even further than before.
And then, of course, from then, we've seen the extrajudicial assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki, his 16-year-old son, multiple other people. I mean, we've seen drone bombings, proliferate to the point where it's innumerable. I mean, it's hard to even keep track of how many drone bombings are going on in Pakistan. There's a giant shadow war going on.
And think about this, too.
It's unbelievable.
Right after the Nidal Hassan Fort Hood shooting, a little over a month after that, December 25th, on Christmas Day, the underwear bomber. And that led to the 3D body scanners and pat-downs.
Yeah, I just want to encourage people to really just connect the dots here, because really, as I'm even learning how connected everything really is when it comes to the war on terror and why every incremental new erosion or implementation of something that's bad, it's always predicated on some fake or in part manufactured or hyped up or prop event.
Yeah, and you could say, yes, this all goes back to 9/11, but it's more nuanced than that. It goes back to 9/11 set this chain of events off, which they have to keep like pumping and injecting in this sort of emotion and fear every once in a while to get us to surrender more of our rights and to accept this conditioning. It's like they know the timing is good too, because it's like they only have to do it maybe like once or twice a year now, and it still keeps us kind of in that mode of, oh yeah, terrorism's real, and they do want to kill us, so it's it's interesting to see what they need to do to get these things passed, you know, or they need to have happen. I shouldn't say do. I don't know if all of these were staged, like the Fort Hood shooting.
Yeah,
I don't know about that. Underwear Bomber is a lot more bizarre. It seems totally staged. Just look at the evidence for it. Kurt Haskell, read his testimony.
Yeah, I haven't seen the evidence really for, and we'll link to that in the timeline right now too. We did an interview with him, but I haven't really seen evidence for the shootings in general to be staged to take away gun control. I find it much more problematic looking at just the erosion of every other liberty already, and everything that's predicated all of those things. So, looking at where we are now, I think it's clear that this is a machine. It's a machine run on profit. To call it any other name, such as the Illuminati, New World Order, Big Brother, or even just these kind of terms that blind people from the truth, which is the obviousness of the fact that we can name these people. They're very brazen. They don't hide. We know who they are. They're involved in...
You could name some of them. I mean...
I mean, of course, there's probably hundreds that we don't know. But the people who are very public, who are in the legislative body, who are in the government, who are representing us, these people we know. These people that we know are complicit. They're covering up things that are criminal. They are lying. They do not represent the people. They represent corporate interests. It all ties in together with the surveillance state, the expansion of this thing. You're telling me that these people don't know how little of a threat terrorism is to us? I mean, of course they do. So they are all willing participants to an extent to maintaining this fascism, this creeping fascism, this soft tyranny, and it's terrifying. And I think that it's very clear what we're living under, and the question is, can we restore this country?
It's almost like a misrepresentation to say that, like, America, the American empire, or like the American, hegemony over the world, it's a corporate empire. America is an engine for corporate military domination. Money rules the world. Cream, Wu-Tang, cash rules everything around me. I mean, that is the reality of the world we're living in. And no matter how you look at it, money is bigger than any country now. Corporate profits are bigger than any country. America makes money. American companies make money, but the biggest companies are not localized to any nation anymore. They're international. They dictate what we do through money or influence or power or whatever.
Yeah.
Mostly money. I mean,
so
it all eventually
if you
goes
do
to
believe
money.
in that, so going back to our whole premise here, which is 9/11, if you do believe that, which it's very obvious, that the corporatocracy kind of controls world governance, that there is no real nation state that is a hegemon, if that is true, then, corporations, we see profiteering off wars, provocations all the time. So would it not make sense to at least assume that the corporatocracy, or this corporate controlled body that exists in the world, knew about 9/11, in part helped engineer it and profited from it? I mean, they don't have allegiance to necessarily the United States of America. They're working externally from our country. It doesn't have to be Mossad. It doesn't have to be some sort of foreign intelligence apparatus in order to make sure that this happens. It's just a...
And when you say it, I mean, it doesn't even have to be more than like a group of 10 people who know exactly what happened that day. Like, the rest of the players could just be unwitting participants or people who profited on it, but maybe they aren't even suspicious. Like, people who maybe even profit off the airline put options are just like, yeah, I was lucky, like, I was given this information,
given a hint, and that's
and I took it, dude. I mean, this is why it is irresponsible to say the Mossad did 9/11, the American government did 9/11, to say that Bush was behind 9/11. I mean, as far as we can see, it's pretty obvious that Cheney has committed crimes on 9/11. Like, whether he was involved in orchestrating it, or if he just let hundreds of people die because he was too lazy or stupid or whatever to not issue an evacuation of the Pentagon. I mean, that's obvious. That's not even up for dispute. I mean, you can find that information out easily. But everybody else, it's like we really don't know their level of complicity. Can't say for sure. And that's why to me it's more effective to just point out these individual facts. And we've made some connections between events here that are not necessarily provable, but
they're all just highly suspicious in the sense that they're timed. And
Yeah.
I mean, if we're living in this kind of Orwellian propaganda matrix, and it just seems a little bit too coincidental. You think that Bin Laden would be releasing this tape on the October surprise, and that he... I mean, it's just all these things are just fake.
Well, it's
it's just absurd.
You can boil it all down to it's almost like they needed to produce this rhythm for us. It started out really intense, like this violent shaking. Like imagine imagine you have this out of control child or something, and you're violently shaking it to get it to stop crying or something like an abusive father would do. And then after you've abused it and traumatized it, you just slowly rock it back and forth to keep it in this sort of lulled state. So it's almost like they've been like a sine wave. They've been rhythmically every once in a while reminding us of terrorism and 9/11 and heightening these fear levels in us to keep us in this certain mindset. And they've been doing it the whole time. They haven't stopped. There's been no like dying down of this. I mean, it just keeps coming. You know, I mean the last big one was the the
Benghazi attack where they said that it was all because of this video and all the everyone hates us and da da da. And now of course the Bin Laden death.
Well, yeah, in between the underwear bomber and now Bin Laden raid happened. Yeah. Zero Dark 30 got made. Mm-hmm. Anwar al-Awlaki and his 16-year-old son were killed in a drone strike, and that sort of set the stage for the NDAA provision about American citizens. Gaddafi was killed in a NATO attack that was not even authorized by Congress. I mean, these are just all things that have happened since the last, supposed terrorism incident in the United States. So it just, this shit just keeps coming. I mean, we'll just have to wait and see how they're going to keep reminding us of 9/11. I mean, look at Homeland. Even a show like Homeland, it's like, shit. I mean, most people who are into that show are like more intellectual-minded people, and it's pure propaganda.
Yeah, and of course. And I just wanted to say one more thing about the movement as it stands now. It's quite a shame that the people who, William Rodriguez, I just talked to him actually today, and he said he really likes the show and he understands what I'm doing, and a lot of other people who I actually respect and admire and who I look up to, who I consider heroes of 9/11. But yeah, there's a few very vocal, psychotic trolls who harass me and everyone I talk to online, saying that I've sold out because I don't address controlled demolition every day, apparently, on Breaking the Cell. Or because I don't address Mossad or Jews running the world, or because I don't address 9/11 even every day.
Well, the most common one in regards to 9/11 I see leveled at you is that why didn't you have the architecture engineers on? Why didn't you have people that talk about Building 7? That seems to be one that on all the 9/11 related stuff. I mean, the Jews one, that seems to be like a YouTube favorite, like greatest hits in general. But I really do think that's a misdirection. Not that it's disinformation or not that it's not valid. I mean, there's plenty of good information and stuff in that research, but it's misdirecting people from the clear, provable evidence that you can pinpoint in which they covered it up and lied about stuff. That's not having nothing to do with like a giant, and like you've said on previous episodes, if we ever got another investigation, we'd have to subpoena these organizations that were part of the cover-up to get information.
Yeah.
How could we do a forensic investigation if all the rubble has been destroyed and the people who've been holding it this whole time are complicit in the cover-up?
Right.
So it is. You can look at as many videos as you want, but you cannot prove it with physical evidence.
You're right.
Even the chain of custody of evidence with Stephen Jones's dust. I mean, I believe that he's not that. The people who gave the dust, it's totally in good faith, but that still wouldn't hold up in court.
Exactly.
There's still
exactly. No, you're absolutely right, and where it stands today is, I mean, obviously 9/11 is the crux of this whole new era that's been ushered in of complete terror and systematic erosion of everything that we've grown up with. But aside from that, I mean, it's just important for us to acknowledge it, but not still be mired down and obsessed with it and be yelling at people who are on our side and who are doing good work. about this and harassing them, because I've realized how damaging it is. I mean, even just being on the other side of, even though I don't censor 9/11, we talk about it all the time, especially on our radio show.
Yep.
It's amazing the amount of harassment that I'm getting, let alone I'm thinking, you know, Rachel Maddow or Amy Goodman are people who might have looked at it, might have taken it seriously. And I'm not giving Amy Goodman or Rachel Maddow a pass. I do think that Amy Goodman probably does have thoughts that she knows that it would be career suicide if she came out and said them. But that isn't helping. I mean, that's a completely insane effort that is doing nothing but destruction, and it's just bad. So, I mean, where we stand today is just, you know, let's just keep awakening people to this information. It's never too late. It's never too late to talk to someone about this, and it never will be too late. This is a very main part of our history. And it's not too late to address it, to tie it back into everything that's going on today, and to continue to bring it up, and everything that will happen.
Yeah, and I don't want to go against everything we just said and believed in this broadcast, but like look at all the information you've found so far, if you've researched this, all the information we've broadcast to you in our 9/11 and anthrax episodes, and try to, like, a counterattack against this agitation propaganda is to find things that you think will resonate emotionally with other people, and use your own, but fact-based, backed up with actual facts that are bulletproof, your own agitation propaganda against theirs. And I think you'll almost always find that it's more powerful because it's based on fact. Their agitation propaganda is based mostly on emotion and, like, connections that aren't really there, between, like beheading Nick Berg, these people cut people's heads off, they're barbarians. I mean, just those kind of things, like, they're very easy to defeat with facts, Even just showing, I've been in this circular argument with these people on a forum for months about the idea that focusing in on the fact that Islamic cultures are more fascistic and more have worse human rights abuses than other religions is a valid subject to, like, tackle as, like, a focus, like if you're a human rights advocate. And my whole thing is, it's like, in the bigger context of human rights abuses, it's actually pretty minuscule. I think that is a form of agitation propaganda, even when it's guised under this intellectual bent where it's like, well, I'm an atheist and I think all religions are terrible, but among them, the Islam is the most egregious because it's the most trying to defeat people's, like, anti-religious thought, because I'm that much of an atheist. I still think that is fed in part by the emotional agitation propaganda designed to change people's minds and to get people to, like, spread hatred.
Yeah, and I think that everything that's going on today, even though we probably won't ever get the truth about 9/11, face it, we still haven't gotten the truth about JFK, and there's so much covered up, and like you just said, the evidence has all been destroyed. It's up to us to immediately point it out, instead of 5 years down the line when no one's going to care, especially 10 years later, everyone's saying, oh, the Iraq War, who cares, we were all duped. It's time that we zero in on this now, expose it as it's happening, and record it real time with a timeline of our own historical account of reality. And that's what I guess Breaking the Set's trying to do, and that's what Media Roots is trying to do, is really zero in on this, expose it for what it is, and try to prevent something like this from ever happening again.
Yeah, just like Karl Rove says, we create reality. What we're trying to do in this episode is show you the reality as it actually happened.
Right.
Like, this is, like, these are the key events. Like, without all that other noise of the elections and and all that other bullshit, this is, like, these are the things that erased our civil liberties and have put us where we are today. And we're not in a better place. You may be, if you were born in 1990 and you're only 10 years old when 9/11 happened, it may seem totally normal to you, but it's really not normal. It's not. No. We have significantly changed as a country, and I think the most disturbing thing for me is to watch people be okay with it. Intelligent, very, like, smart people who are not pro-government are not bothered by it, in the sense that they don't feel like it affects them personally. They're just like, oh, well, it's bad, and yeah, it's like, should go away, but, like, I'm not affected by it personally.
That's the sophistication and genius of the new rebranding of the Obama war on terror.
Dude.
And that's where we're at. And so when people say we're better off because Bush isn't president, I actually don't agree, because it really is this soft fascistic takeover and rebranding of the same imperialist aggressor. You know,
the
just
Obama
under a different
administration's war on terror propaganda, agitation propaganda, has been much more like relaxed and casually thrown out there. The most extreme thing that probably happened was as far as like an immediate response, sort of like Patriot Act 2. No, I think it was like the underwear bomber leading to the 3D scanners, because that was like, those shit was ready to go. I mean, the 3D scanners were there. It was just like boom, you know. And then like the whole debate about getting patted down. To me, that's probably the most.
Was that under Obama?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, it was. Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, see, it's even hard to remember that because it's like, wait, that sounds so Bush-like.
Well, and also
like,
Michael Chertoff, the former head of the former head of the DHS. During all the fuck-ups of Katrina and stuff, he is now a lobbyist for Rapiscan, the main company that implemented the body scanners. So
no way. No, I'm just kidding. Of
wow.
course. I mean, it's not surprising.
I was like, wow, are you really shocked?
I think, wasn't John Ashcroft like this sits on the board of one of those companies now too? I forgot what. Yeah, it all goes around.
It all comes around, goes around. Yeah, that's what I mean when I say these people. It's like we know who the propagandists are. We know who's doing this shit. Like, let's call them out.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna take off because it's 1 and I have work tomorrow. But it was awesome to go over all of this stuff, and we'll definitely be doing another radio show soon, just talking about current events. And we just thought it was important to kind of outline a lot about 9/11 and everything that's happened and how it ties together for Media Roots.
Yeah, and just how it's tied together in your own life, whether you feel it personally or not, because these shifts have happened, and law is in a different place than it was 10 years ago. It's in a completely different place. And now drones are normal, you know? Like, that's indirectly a result of this sort of rhythm that's happened, you know, since 9/11. And yeah, I mean, we could talk about this forever. But
yeah, and the rest of the world looks to us for like the example, and that's why everyone else is going to get away with this shit too, because we're setting kind of this moral example around the world. Of course, everyone doesn't really look to us as the moral exemplar, but do you know what I'm saying? Like, in terms of militarily, it's like we're setting the stage now for just a whole new era of robot wars.
Yeah.
And it's just important for us to just be awake, alert, aware, and like just be educating each other.
Yeah, don't live in fear. I mean, it's too easy to get to that point. I mean, you just got to realize that, you know, don't be afraid. Just keep talking about it and keep trying to wake people up about it, and do it in a responsible way, because, you know, it's really easy to, you know, for people to latch on to like one incorrect thing you say, you know, and try to defeat you or whatever. I mean, a lot of those times people like that aren't even worth arguing with in the first place. But just, you know, just make sure you have your facts. And a lot of the things in the 9/11 truth movement that have been in various movies have been disinformation, and it's not, you know, people have made mistakes. People have revised, like Dylan Avery revised Loose Change over time to make it much more solid. Final Cut is great as far as the resources, especially the first half, not about controlled demolition. So, you know, everybody makes mistakes. You learn from those mistakes, and, you know, just make your case stronger.
Just keep an open mind. I mean, just keep an open mind, and just, even if you don't agree with anything that we just said, just keep an open mind about everything that's happened since and what will continue to happen. I mean, just look at everything critically, because we can't trust these people at all. I mean, that isn't right now.
No.
So.
I mean, if you think the Bush administration lied about WMDs, well then, you know, just look a little bit further and you could see that they lied about almost every single thing that they did. And so does Barack Obama. And it's not that the presidents are liars, it's that the office itself is a platform for a figurehead to lie on behalf of an organization that's lied for the last century, at least. I mean, probably even longer. But this is, the American government is one of the most powerful propaganda purveyors in the entire world. And working in tandem with the Western corporate-owned media, it's incredibly strong and effective. And we just got to keep pushing back against that. You know?
And everyone tune into Breaking the Set. Breaking the Set on YouTube, and you know, we're doing this shit every day, just breaking apart the propaganda model. But Robbie, was awesome to talk to you. I'm gonna take off now. Everyone, I wanted to say one more quick thing. Everyone donate to MediaRoots.org if you want to see these broadcasts continue. We're a very small operation. We're launching our new website soon. We need writers, we need researchers, we need everyone who can help, who's a capable writer. So get in contact with us, info@MediaRoots.org. And, we're a very grassroots project. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you listening to the show.
Hey, have a good night, Abby.
You too, dude.
Good night, everybody. Or
good night.
Good day, whatever time
good
it is.
Good day, good night, good afternoon, goodbye.
The Bush administration will allow National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice to testify publicly before the 9/11 Commission.
For President Bush, it was a dramatic reversal.
I've ordered this level of cooperation because I consider it necessary to gaining a complete picture of the months.
And even the president and vice president agreed to meet with the commission, but with a catch. They insisted on meeting together behind closed doors and not under oath.
President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
We have to have one story, so I'll say part, and if I get it wrong, hedge a little bit and give me the next.
I want to thank the chairman and vice chairman for giving us a chance to share views on different subjects. And they had a lot of good questions, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I took the time.
What topic did the commissioners want to spend most of the time on?
It's probably best that I not go into the details of the conversation.
The president and vice president of the United States, don't you think they should be able to stand up and speak their own words?
They should go under oath.
They should be, in public.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what you
Adam,
said?
you asked me that question yesterday. I got the same answer, yeah.